Hey, welcome. On behalf of the University of Denver, the Daniels College of Business, and Entrepreneurship at DU, welcome to our first Entrepreneurship through Acquisition event. Really appreciate you all spending your morning with us. My name is Joshua Ross. I am the Director of Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, and I'm teaching faculty. Very excited. We have a very diverse group of people here today. We have people that are looking to buy a business, people looking to sell a business. Some of you just want to understand what this whole thing's about, entrepreneurship through acquisition. And then we have a lot of resources. We have some bankers and legal and attorneys and brokers. And also get to see some old friends that I haven't seen in a while. So it's awesome. Why entrepreneurship through acquisition? Why is this important to us? Well, we are looking at this at being at the right place at the right time. On the sell side, you're going to hear a lot about this today, but there's trillions of dollars in baby boomer business assets that they're looking to sell, liquidate, pass on. And then on the buy side, you have a lot of people that are looking at maybe perhaps a career change, or wanting to do something different with their lives, but maybe don't have that business idea or want to take that risk of starting something from scratch. And so this is where we look at the opportunity, but we also are very sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of complexity to this. There's a lot of complexity to buying a business and to selling a business. And most people that are going through this are going through this the first time. Forgot to advance the slide. There you go. Going through this for their very first time, and they don't know what they don't know. And I say this from firsthand experience. I sold a business, and as I reflect on it, I made a lot of mistakes that I wouldn't make the second time. So that's what brings us here today. Our goal is to start to build a community around entrepreneurship through acquisition here at the university, where there's guidance, there's tools, there's curriculum to help people that are going down that journey of either buying or selling a business. So today, we're here to talk about buying a business. In May, we'll have a similar event on selling a business. My one ask from all of you, and I'll put this back up later, is we want to know what you want. We're going to be very high level today in terms of what we talk about, but we can go very deep on a lot of these different topics that I think are very important. So at the first break, I'll put back up the slide, and if you haven't had a chance to put in your input, we want to know who you are, why you're here, what you're interested in. And then later on at the end, at the conclusion, we have another one that's going to ask you what other things that you want to learn about, want to hear about, and to attend. Okay. So we have an amazing group of speakers today that are experts that are going to talk about buying a business. So I'm done talking. Let's bring on our first speaker, Neil Pollard, who is the faculty member here at the University of Denver in entrepreneurship and also an entrepreneur. Let's give him a big round of applause, please.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, everybody. As Joshua mentioned, my name is Neil Pollard, and I'm teaching assistant professor of entrepreneurship here at the University of Denver. And I basically come here every day and just get to help students make their dreams come true. And it's actually literally how I think about my job. And it's so much fun. And I think we spend a lot of time here on campus with students, but not nearly as much time with the community as we should. And so I kind of started thinking about ETA almost by accident. I went to a conference maybe a little over a year ago, and just happened to end up in a session where there was a gentleman talking about his experience with buying companies and ETA, and I was like, okay, and it sort of just got filed away in my brain. And sort of concurrently, someone had come to Joshua, actually one of our adjunct faculty members, and said, there's this thing happening and we should be paying attention to it. And so I think he kind of did the same thing. He's like, that's interesting, let me file that away. And then it started, I don't know if it was an algorithm or something started happening where stuff started just kind of popping up, and it started to become more and more front and center in my mind. And so this past summer, I started spending a lot of time thinking about and researching this thing, entrepreneurship through acquisition, and went to Joshua at the end of the summer and just said, I think that there's something happening here that we should pay attention to. I had found that all the biggest business schools in the world were teaching entrepreneurship through acquisition, and I'll stop saying all three words here at some point, because we'll all get to the point where we know it's just ETA, and did a ton of research, and I was like, there's a lot happening in this area, and almost none of it's happening in Colorado. And I was like, okay, so somebody ought to do something about this, and people who are inherently entrepreneurial, doesn't take them very long to go, well, we're going to be the people who's going to do something about that, right? So we started having lots of conversations and put this event together. We have a number of students that are here supporting, so when you see them, maybe just kind of thank them for their time because they're here for free. And our department is here, John and Joshua is here, but I think nothing that we do can happen without Ashley Mercer, who's probably out there. But she will never say it, but she's the most important person in our department, and she puts together this entire event and makes it all happen. So if you see Ashley walking around, make sure to thank her as well. So if you didn't get one of these on the way in, you're welcome to go out and grab one. It's kind of a guide for the day, and there's a bunch of resources in here, but it also has each speaker and kind of a couple of notes pages for you to be able to jot things down. My contact information is in here, so if you're interested in reaching out afterwards, then please feel free. So what are we doing here? What is this ETA thing? Well, the more research I did, the more I realized ETA is not necessarily a new thing. Like, this has been happening for hundreds of years. But there's sort of a renewed focus, a renewed invigoration, I guess, into this thing called ETA. So Carolyn, who you're going to hear from here shortly, you're here, I saw you somewhere, yeah. So when we first started meeting with Carolyn, she's a business broker here in town, and she was like, I've been in this industry for nearly a decade, and ETA, the first time I heard that was maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And so even in the industry, it's sort of this new thing that's bubbling up. And we're going to talk about what ETA is. That's my job, to just sort of do a high-level overview, and what it's not. And so entrepreneurship through acquisition, there's a big, wordy definition up there, but we're acquiring a business with the intent to grow it. And so we're not buying a donut shop to run a donut shop the same way it has always been run, but with the intent to grow in some way. It doesn't mean that buying a donut shop and running that single location isn't valuable or interesting. Of course it is. But ETA specifically has this growth orientation, and our idea, our goal is to acquire this business that is perhaps a legacy business, maybe is a little bit antiquated. And then we use resources, innovation, entrepreneurial spirit, and energy, and some optimization of resources or strategies to ideally grow that business over time. And that's the goal of ETA. ETA is not startup entrepreneurship. And I think there will always be a place for that. We're going to start businesses for sure, in perpetuity. But that's not what ETA is. It's not absentee entrepreneurship. We see lots of misleading sort of get-rich-quick type schemes where it's like buy a business, lay on a beach, and let the money show up, right? It's not that. It's not private equity, although you'll hear from Sean Kearns later about how private equity can dovetail really nicely from an acquisition strategy, but it's not in and of itself private equity. It's not all these other acquisition strategies like venture capital or leverage buyouts or management buy-ins or even family business. It's not any of those things. And what's really interesting is, as a burgeoning researcher, so I'm in the PhD program here, I'm working on my dissertation, and hopefully get to graduate in August. So as a nerdy researcher, I kind of started to research a lot of these things. And if you go into Google Scholar and you search any of these things, There's thousands and thousands of papers that come up on any one of these things. So I did the same search for ETA, and I found 6 papers worth printing out. And so it's so new and nascent and exciting, and nobody's really thinking about it or paying attention to it. And so we're like, all right, we're going to be the ones that get to pay attention to this thing. So who is ETA for? I mean, the short answer is everyone can do this. There's a real answer, though. Okay, so the short answer is like, yes, sure, it could be for everyone. But the real answer is that this is for people who are sort of entrepreneurially curious. And so we're thinking about starting our own business maybe. We would like to do our own thing. The 2 people in the garage scares us a little bit. Maybe we have a young family, or we've got a car payment or a mortgage or something like that we have to deal with. And we can't do the startup thing. That's not interesting to us, right? But a lot of ETA people are established professionally. So we have some skills that we've been developing, maybe a network that we've been developing. We've probably built some level of investable assets. We've got some liquid capital that we can invest. And we're going to talk about what that looks like here in a little bit. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm staying on time. Acquisition entrepreneurs are resourceful. Well, so are regular entrepreneurs, right? But acquisition entrepreneurs are resourceful. They are skilled. There's some level of skill that you have to be able to do this. Generally, these are motivated people. And when I was going through it, we were tired of seeing the fruits of our labor in, it's really hard for me to look at that word labor. I grew up in Canada, and so if you know anything about Canada, there's supposed to be a U in there, right? So you're tired of seeing the fruits of labor redirected elsewhere. So you're working so hard, and you're seeing these companies grow, and you're not necessarily benefiting from it. So this, I think, is an ideal ETA candidate, right? The searcher. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that something is happening. I'm sorry that that's so small. But we have this. This is not meant to offend anyone, okay? So I'm sorry if it is. But we have this thing that's happening, right? We have this big, call it silver tsunami, call it whatever you would like. Joshua mentioned it, but we have roughly 11,200 people a day turning 65 in this country. And almost the exact same number of those people are retiring every day. And so we have this big wave that's happening in the industry, and we're seeing this shift. And so we are approaching in a number of years here where 1/4 of our population is going to be over the age of 65. And so this is particularly interesting. It's also interesting because these are our business owners. There's 51% of all the companies in this country owned by somebody who's 55 years old or older. So in the next 5 to 10 years, these folks are going to start to think about retiring. And these are great businesses. They've been businesses that these folks have been running for years and years and years. And they're getting ready to transition. The scary part is they don't, I think 60%, I found, 60% of these folks don't have any meaningful transition plan. And the one that they do have maybe is not the most useful. Oh, I feel so bad, man. The sun's right in your eyes. So this equates to 2.5 million businesses almost that are about to switch hands or get wound down and sold off for parts, which I don't think is a better option, right? Because then all we're left with is great big companies, and that's not good for consumers. It's not good for competition in the market, all that sort of stuff. Joshua mentioned, there's $10 trillion in business assets that are about to change hands, and there's no one to receive it. This is the big challenge, okay? So, unfortunately, most of the succession plans are, I'm going to leave this business, I'm going to give this business, I'm going to sell this company to my children. And unfortunately, you're describing the I want to forge my own path generation. And the problem is these folks, these young people, the ones I teach all day, every day, they value experiences. They don't value things. They don't want stuff. They don't want things. They don't necessarily want to run the business that mom or dad have been running their entire life, right? Where they were in diapers running around in the office, right? Like, they don't want that company. They want your money, which sounds kind of callous, but they're right, actually. I'm going to tell you why they're right. we have to think about success rates and failure rates of any type of business. So we have a new startup business. You have a brand new startup business. There's an 80 or 90% chance that that business is not going to exist in 7 to 10 years, okay? And so this is widely regarded as like the failure rate of startup entrepreneurship. And I think it's important for us to qualify this a little bit, okay? It's not that 80 to 90% of businesses fail. 80 to 90% of businesses cease to exist 7 to 10 years later. So some of those are wound down intentionally. My most recent company was going incredibly well, and I wound it down on purpose because it was too early to sell it, and I love my job here too much. And so I couldn't keep doing both. But at any rate, 80 to 90% of all businesses, 9 out of 10 businesses cease to exist in 10 years. And so this is inherently risky and a problem that we should be trying to solve. I mean, think about it. If 80 to 90% of babies didn't make it to their 7th or 10th birthday, like we'd be doing something about this, wouldn't we? You know, 80 to 90% of trains didn't make it to their destination, we'd be fixing the problem. And so there's a problem here, and I think that one of the biggest problems with this is that probably a vast majority of those businesses should not have been started in the first place. And so we have this whole startup issue that exists, and that's fine. So we'll put a pin in that for a second. What's wild to think about is that the success of family businesses after transition from the founder to the second generation is not remarkably more successful. Didn't say that well, but you know what I'm saying. So 70% of all businesses that transition from a parent to a child or to a second generation in the family cease to exist in the same time period. So we're not seeing a lot of family business transition having a lot more success than startup businesses. And when you measure from the second to the third generation, 12% of them exist still. And if you go to a fourth generation, it's 2 or 3% of businesses. And so generationally, passing a business from you as the founder to your child, perhaps, through a family business succession plan is probably not the way to go either, if you want it to succeed. But what we also know, coincidentally, is that 70% of companies that are acquired still exist 7 to 10 years later. So the success rate of an acquisition is remarkably better than starting a business from scratch or gifting or selling it to your child. And so we have a new ETA logic that I'm proposing. Now, there is zero research based on this at all, but actually when I've done my dissertation, this is what I'm hoping to explore, is owner of company A, okay? You've run this company for 20, 30 years, you're getting ready to retire. My contention is you should not probably give it to your child or sell it to your child. What you should do is sell that business, a new owner buys it from you, and owns and grows company A. That company, 70% chance of that company succeeding. You take the proceeds from the sale of your business and give it to your child if you want, or use it to support your child buying a different business that they do care about. And then they buy and run company B, and there's a 70% chance of both of those companies succeeding. Rather than you sell your business to your child, 70% chance that's gonna, thank you, 70%, is that 10 or 50? Yeah, 10. 70% chance that that company's going to fail. And then they start their own business, 90% chance that one's gonna fail. And so it's just a different way to think about succession if we can set this up for success. So, okay, great. Neil, I've had a sip of the Kool-Aid. I'm into it. What do I think is an ideal target for a business? Well, we should just buy one of those. Yeah? Yeah, go for it. And if any of you today can go out and buy one of those companies, I would like to see you after I get off stage, because I have a proposition for you. Realistically, we're not buying those companies, right? Those are sexy companies. Those are really exciting, sexy companies. But that's not what ETA companies are, okay? We are not likely to buy these companies. And we're not looking for sexy companies when we're buying ETA companies. We're looking for legacy, good, solid businesses that have been important in the market, like these ones. Like these are the businesses that we're looking to buy through an ETA process. Ones that have dozens of years of revenue. Ones that have a predictable demand into the future, right? We have machine shops and mechanics and pet services businesses. You're going to hear about that in a little bit here, right? Companies where there are trends that are starting to pick up, right? Like, is there a, oh, there is. Like, a really interesting trend I talk about all the time in the market is dogs becoming humans. You know, like people treating their dog as humans anymore. And you know, if you have a bag, if you have a dog that fits in a bag, you're a part of this, right? And that's fine, and that's exciting. And we can take advantage of it over time. Health and wellness as a trend. People are spending more time and thought and energy around their bodies and their wellness and their well-being. And so we can, like, I don't think we're at risk of people not using water anytime soon, you know? So plumbing becomes really interesting because the population is growing or kind of leveling off now, but our houses are getting older and the systems are getting older when they have to be fixed. And so lots of really, really interesting businesses that are not necessarily sexy businesses, right? We're not talking about some, you know, inventing some AI company, although you may use innovation and technology and AI to come in and revolutionize how some of these businesses work. I think that's a great opportunity. And so, all right, it's maybe a little bit early for this question, don't you think? It's like, all right, Neil, it's a little personal. Does size matter? Well, if we're talking, depends on what we're talking about, right? If we're talking about ETA, I would say absolutely the size matters, right? The size of the company is what we're talking about. And so what we're looking at is sort of a Goldilocks and the Three Bears type of situation, right? That's too hot, that's too cold, that one's just right. That bed's too hard, that one's too soft, that one's just right. And so there is a sweet spot that I think where ETA is uniquely positioned to create a ton of value, okay? So we're not talking about hobby businesses, right? Like, if we have a company that's making something on Etsy and you're selling a few units a month and it's helping you, you know, redo the backyard or something, that's great. That's probably not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the dog walker. Nothing against dog walking. I think it's fine. But that's probably not a business that's well-positioned to scale, well-positioned to acquire and grow. Okay? We're also not talking about the 800-pound gorillas. We're not talking about great big companies that have tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. Because unless there's something I don't know about you, we're probably not well-positioned as an individual to go and buy a company for hundreds of millions of dollars. Private equity, and again, Sean's going to discuss private equity in here in a little while, but I think there's a nice dovetail, there's a nice partnership there. But if you are going into a deal, and it's you as an individual, and a private equity acquisition, or a private equity firm that's looking to buy that company, you're fighting an 800-pound gorilla. And we will have trouble, right? As individuals, we'll struggle. And so we're not looking at little tiny businesses, we're not looking at huge businesses. We're looking at the sweet spot right in the middle, right? It might be, could ETA opportunities be less than $250,000? Sure, could be. Could it be more than $5 million? It could be. But this nice sweet spot creates a company that has measurable revenue and is a size where private equity companies are most often going to kind of ignore these smaller deals. It's just not big enough for them to do their due diligence and all that. And it's small enough for us to be able to put together a couple of partners to be able to buy something in a reasonable way, right? So the way I think about it is that the ETA, a prime ETA opportunity is kind of right there in this sweet spot. And so you go, great, how do we find this? Well, it's not like driving around a neighborhood, thank you, and seeing business signs for sale, right? There are online forums that you can go to, and so these are fine. You have to spend a lot of time sifting through these and finding the right deals. You can connect with your friendly local broker, okay? So this is Carolyn, and they've got deals that they're listing themselves, but they can also put you onto deals that exist. But realistically, you're gonna find a deal somewhere, and so here's an example of a deal that I found yesterday. Okay? So here's a wellness clinic. I have no idea what it's called because they are intentionally quiet and reserved. Okay? There's a lot of reasons why the seller of a business is not going to be overly public about them selling their company, especially if they have employees. But so here's the deal. It's cash flowing 1,100, so that means they have cash coming in of 1.1 million for the year, asking 2.6. So some multiple of cash flow they're asking for their business. And you look at this and you go, whoa, 2.6. I don't have 2.6 million. I can't do that. Well, what's exciting is you don't have to, right? So here is a very rudimentary example of how you might possibly do this. And this is the exciting part of ETA, okay? And so my friend Rob Sermonar is here. He's in the program. And so he's going to refute everything that I say right now because he's in the process of SBA lending. But here is a very simplified, an overly simplified example of how this might go. So we have a business here, $2.6 million they're asking. Well, that's unrealistic. We're not going to actually pay somebody what they're asking. Okay? And so we're going to agree on $2.25 million. So you're going to have to show up with 10% or so. So you show up with $250,000 investable assets, and you get a loan for $2 million. Okay? So if you do it at 10%, they're not going to give it to you for longer than 10 years because they expect that you're not going to exist in 7 to 10 years. Banks are notoriously conservative. And so if you do the loan calculation at 10%, because you're kind of risky, you're looking at a loan payment of $27,000-ish a month. Oh. Anybody have a mortgage like that? $27,000 a month? Like, of course not. But the company's cash flowing $91,000 a month. And so you can use that $91,000 to pay for the company, fund your salary as an owner, and pay for some operations, some increase in efficiency, some new and interesting products and services, and grow the company over time using the cash flow of the business to pay for the company. And so these are great ETA opportunities. Now, I'm not advocating for this one. Don't go find this and buy it because I said so. Okay? I'm not guaranteeing anything about this idea. But it's just an example of how you might do this. Okay? And so this would be an example of a self-funded search if you're going to do this by yourself. There are other ways to do it. So we have search funds, which is beyond what we're going to talk about today. What we could put together a search fund, have a group of people invest in our search, and we spend a year looking for the right business to buy. Okay? It's the idea of a search fund. Your seller might carry some of that. So in this example, if you don't qualify for the $2 million loan, well, maybe the seller will carry $1 million of it. You get an SBA loan for the other $1 million, and you bring the liquid capital that you need to run it. There's a bunch of different really interesting, I don't know if Sean's going to talk about it, but in a podcast episode that he and I did the other day, he talked about an acquaintance or a friend that used pre-commitments from customers as a way to fund the acquisition of a company, right? So lots of really interesting creative ways that you can do this. And so as I start to wrap up here, we've got some power and we've got some perils of ETA. There's lots of, I'm going to deal with the bad stuff first. Okay, so bad stuff, maybe this is good, maybe it's bad. You step into the CEO role day one. And what's maybe interesting is that might be the first day you meet all of your new employees. That might be the first, they didn't know about you before today. And so, are you ready to do that? They're going to look at you and say, what do we do, boss? And you have to be ready with an answer, right? So that's challenging, that's scary. There are near immediate cash flow needs. You take over day one, you have payroll due in 2 weeks. Rent's coming up in a month. Are you ready? Do you have that liquid capital to be able to run it, okay? Electricity bills coming due next week, right? Excel is not very patient. Domain knowledge. Do you have the domain knowledge? Do you know how to do this? Maybe not. But if you don't know it day one, then what's the plan to build that domain knowledge pretty quickly, okay? Are you buying liability? Are you buying sour relationships? This all comes out of the due diligence process, right? Do you have disgruntled key employees that are going to take off day one? That's a scary thing, and we got to have those conversations as we're doing the due diligence that we need, okay? Seller discretion. So sellers are going to be quite often are going to be necessarily quiet with their inner circle about what's happening. Because if they start telling their employees that they're about to sell the company, those employees, that's uncertainty. They might start to leave. Key vendor relationships, key customers might start to leave. And so they have to be necessarily quiet. And that's really hard because all of a sudden it's this big surprise to all these key stakeholders. And then overvaluation, I think, is overvaluation on the part of the sellers because they remember the blood and the sweat and the tears, like quite literally all three. They remember the missed birthday parties and they had to cut off their anniversary dinner early for an important call, right? They remember all those things. And so that's in the valuation that they have, but you as the buyer, you have a hard time paying for those things. right? And so that's a challenge that we have to navigate. But lots of really cool benefits too. So you're gonna step into CEO day one. Like maybe you've been mired and stuck in the middle of middle management. You can't get past where you wanna get to. And so fast track to CEO role day one, right? You walk in day one, it's your show now. That's exciting. You skip the 2 friends and the ramen noodles thing in the garage, right? You don't have to deal with that, right? You walk into actual measurable cash flow day one, hopefully, if we've negotiated the right deal. We have established customers that we can hopefully trust into the future. Ideally, you're bringing transferable knowledge and skills. So you may not have domain knowledge, but you're great at something. And if you're not, then maybe this is not the right time for you yet. You have to become the right person to do this, and how are we going to do that? But you've got something that you can bring to the table. You are hopefully inheriting expertise. There are expert entrepreneurs in that company, employees in that company that know something, and you're inheriting that domain knowledge, hopefully. Ideally, a lot of these opportunities are ripe for innovation, and it reduces risk, right? The risk of starting, 90% of all businesses that we start cease to exist. You're skipping over that, because this business has been running for 20 years, and that's really exciting. And because you have measurable cash flow, it could be easier to access funding. And so I just want to take 30 minutes today just sort of to talk through some of the important aspects, some of the big sort of 30,000-foot view of how we think about, or how I would love for you to be thinking about ETA. And I'll be around the rest of the day. Happy to chat sort of at the breaks or afterwards. And that's the start. We got 30 minutes in. So thank you so much for your time. And one really interesting and important aspect of ETA, one interesting way to do it is through acquiring a standalone business, but another way is through acquiring a franchise. So we have Kevin Betts here, and he is executive director of our Liniger Center for Franchising here at the University of Denver. He's gonna talk to you a little bit about probably his experience in having interacted and been in the franchising world, and how this plays a nice role into buying and growing a company. So Kevin, welcome.
All right, well, good morning. As Neil said, my name is Kevin Betts. How many of you have been experienced in franchising, whether as a franchisee, franchisor, or maybe a supplier? Okay, so a small few of you, and some of you have perhaps had some good experiences, maybe great experience, and maybe some pretty terrible experiences. And so, I'm not here to tell you that franchising is the best way to do things. It's not for everybody, and I think it's important to understand the model and to understand how franchise model works in order to determine whether or not it's going to be a good fit for you. And a lot of the things that Neil just covered are validated, I think, inside of franchising. And so we'll talk about some of those things, but one in particular that kind of struck me is just, the idea of what ETA is. I had never heard the term ETA until about a couple months ago when I met with Joshua and Neil. But, buying businesses, existing businesses, been around for many years, and now it's packaged as I guess a strategy that people use. And what I've noticed, at least in some of the franchise concepts that I've been part of, I helped start and grow a couple of different concepts. Probably the most recognizable would be Elements Massage, some Fitness Together, it's mostly in the health and wellness space. And what I've seen is that, similar to what he said, when somebody comes in, say, owner A sells to owner B, almost indefinitely, every single time we would see a spike in growth. And that spike in growth varied, but it wasn't uncommon to see maybe 14, 15% growth from transfer of ownership, just investing new energy, new money, new passion, desire, et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that. But franchises are everywhere. And a lot of times people, when they think of franchise, they immediately go straight to restaurants. And certainly that's true, but franchising it's not an industry. It's become one of the most well-used models in the world, spanning hundreds of industries and thousands of franchise systems and hundreds of thousands of units across the United States. You can't walk down the street and not engage at some level with a franchise. And I think it's important to note that, there's a lot of people out there using the franchise model, even some that you may not recognize as a franchise. In the coming year, it's going to contribute about $900 billion in economic output on the aggregate. It's made up of a bunch of small business owners, but when you aggregate that, it produces some very big numbers. Employs about 9 million people, and represents nearly 3% of the GDP. Colorado happens to be one of the top 10 states for franchise projected growth, along with the other states up there. And we don't have time to get into all the nuances and pros and cons and things of franchising, but if you're interested in looking into more data on the economic outlook report in franchising, you can download it from the QR code there. As he mentioned, plumbing and some of those industries are among the fastest growing right now. So a lot of personal service types of brands and products and services and such. But, like I said, today we're not going to get into all the nuances of franchising. My hope for today is to talk with you a little bit about the franchising model, how it works, how it fits in the ETA strategy or context, and leave you with some steps and resources that you can refer back to if you want to look into it a little bit further. So with that, let's start with what is a franchise. And there's two types of franchise. There's one what they would call more of a traditional franchise, which is going to be your distributorships like automobile, bottling, manufacturing, etc. And then there's business format franchising. And business format franchising is where the franchisor or the system provides an entire operating, platform, everything from site selection to help with and resources with, the development and the operational protocol and, your service path and such. And so business format franchising, when I say franchising today, that's the context with which I'm going to talk to it about. And so, bottling and distributorships, manufacturing, not really the focus of what I'm talking about today. But, franchises regulated, I should say the sale of franchises are regulated by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And they have the FTC rule, basically that defines a franchise legally as this. If you're required to use a trademark, a trade name, a symbol, if you're required to use that in your brand, then that would be part of one of the components of a franchise. If there's a promise of substantial or significant assistance or guidance or control, then that would be a component of a franchise. And if you have to pay a fee, whether that fee is an initial franchise fee, a royalty, a marketing fee, any kind of fee really that extends above $500 in a 6-month time frame, that would be a component of a franchise. So when you combine the three together, if it has those features, it's a franchise. And like I said, a lot of times people will say, when they think of franchise, they immediately go to McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or Taco Bell or some of these big restaurant chains. And certainly those are all franchises. But what you may not know is there's a lot of other concepts that are very well known that use the franchise model. Ace Hardware, for example. IKEA. I don't know if you guys know that IKEA is a franchise. And even some small brands that you might recognize that you think are maybe more boutique might actually be franchised. Goldfish Swim School, Wild Birds Unlimited. Some of these little, smaller places that you get to know the owner and the operator maybe of a business might actually be a franchised, even though they're owned and operated. There's certainly some states that have some differing terms or additions to those, but that's kind of essentially the legal makeup of a franchise. Now let's talk about the practical side. On the practical side of a franchise, you've got really two key parties in that relationship. There's the franchisor, and the franchisor is typically the person or people that built the model. They're the ones that actually were the startup founders, typically, not always, but typically. The startup entrepreneur. And they got to a certain point that they decided they wanted to scale that model and felt that they couldn't either scale it as big as they wanted to on their own or decided they didn't want to, one way or another, and decided to start franchising. And so the other person in the relationship is the franchisee. And the franchisee essentially buys the rights to use that model, that learning, that know-how under the service mark or trademark, and using the operating guidance and controls to fit within that. And through that, an interdependent relationship is formed. And it's important to understand that it's an interdependent relationship. I think it's, each of the parties relies on the other party to do their role successfully in order for both to be successful. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes franchisors don't do their part. Sometimes franchisees don't do their part. And when either party breaks down, it creates problems. And those problems sometimes magnify. Sometimes they can be overcome. But there's inevitably problems in the relationship, and it's really understanding what the roles are, what the responsibilities are, and how they interact. And the terms of those things are all outlined in what they call a franchise disclosure document. It's a document that you get that has a variety of different things, which we'll get into a little bit later, and the franchise agreement. So let's talk about some common misconceptions. We won't get into all of them, but a couple to mention. Franchisees are just buying a job and they have no control over the business. It's a misconception. Certainly there's some limitations. If you're in a franchise environment and your grandmother has a fantastic taco recipe that people love, Taco Bell doesn't really care. They're not going to let you just sell whatever products or services that you want. When you're in a franchise business, you're buying a model and you're buying into that model. And so the more mature the model is, perhaps the less flexibility you're going to have to adapt and create. If you're in an emerging brand, a very smaller, kind of an emerging brand, then you really have an opportunity to kind of put some entrepreneurial thinking on and really help shape and form the product and service that actually gets developed. But, despite the fact that it's a franchise, you still very much own that business. You're responsible 100% for the day-to-day operations of that business, and you still have an opportunity to be, and a requirement really, to be very entrepreneurial. You're just doing it within a set of guidelines and brand standards that are required. But it's no less of an entrepreneurial endeavor than any other business and business startup. It requires all the same effort and work, but you're able to perhaps leverage the power of a system. For any of you that owned a business in the past or even currently, you can find that business ownership can be very lonely. And sometimes it's really hard to find people that can relate to the pressures and stresses that you deal with. In a franchise environment, you can kind of, they say be in business for yourself, but not by yourself. And you get to leverage and associate those experiences with others and learn from others in the system. Another misconception, franchising is easy money because you're buying a proven business. Proven is a very subjective word. Certainly there are certain businesses that you can buy in a franchise world that are, you could call them proven. I mean, you can pretty much predict that if you're going to buy this based on the historical data and evidence that the company has, you're likely to accomplish, this. And it's pretty solid. There's a lot of information. But if you're buying into an emerging brand, not all franchise concepts are proven yet. They might be providing a business model, but that business model is only proven to the extent that it's been replicated. And how many times has it been replicated? If you're one of those early adopters and you go in and you're one of the first 10 franchisees in a system, there's nothing proven probably about that except that the founder was able to make it successful over some frame of time. You're there to prove it. You're there to prove it out. Even if there's a couple locations open, if you're an early adopter, you're helping to prove out that model. And that's a pretty important task. But you have to understand, what are you buying, when are you buying, and does it meet the expectation and goal that you have? And so those are a couple misconceptions, that I think it's important to understand, that just because it's a franchise doesn't mean it's not going to meet some of the failure rates or cease to exist rates that Neil talked about. It's slightly better, but it's not incredibly better. So this is kind of where I want to get into how does this maybe fit with ETA. And, you know, on its face, ETA is you're buying an existing business. Well, with a franchise, you might be buying an existing concept or idea, but oftentimes you're still opening a new business. And so it doesn't have the true startup, you know, entrepreneurial side of things, but it's definitely, if you're buying into a business, can be a startup in a franchise. You just have the concept, you have the best practices, you get to learn from the mistakes of the founding or other franchisees in the system. But let's talk about some common methods of expansion and how you might think about it in the context of ETA. So first off, a franchisor. Now you might not think of a franchisor as entrepreneurship through acquisition. After all, usually the franchisor is the founding, you know, startup entrepreneur. That said, one example of this is when we launched Elements Massage, we didn't launch it from scratch. We bought an existing massage business called Aurora Therapeutic Massage. It had a single unit with an owner-operator, and she knew a lot about massage. We didn't. We knew a lot about how to franchise. And so we bought this existing business, so you could call it ETA. We transformed it. We changed the trade name. We changed the trade dress. We changed certain components of the execution on a day-to-day service path. We kept a lot of things the same, and we packaged up all of the knowledge, learning, know-how, best practices, learnings, etc. of that founder, and made it that we can replicate it and made it franchisable and launched Elements Massage. So that would be one example of how a franchisor might use ETA and then use franchising as a strategy for growth and expansion. Then you've got your single unit franchise. This is the most common franchise. Most people that own a franchise are a single unit franchisee, which means they own one location. If you own an IKEA, you're a single unit franchisee most often. If you own a Chick-fil-A, they don't often sell multi-unit. They limit you to one location. And within franchising, there's a whole variety of flexibility within the structured nuances. And those flexibilities come in the form of, you know, not only what are you selling, but how are you selling it, what are the terms that you're selling, et cetera, et cetera. So most people buy a single unit franchisee. And though you might be buying a concept, like I said earlier, you often are still starting, you know, at some level from scratch. Now you get to do that with the learnings of the system and the founder, but make no mistake, if you're going to buy, say, you know, a Goldfish Swim School, you're going to have to do site selection, lease negotiation, tenant improvements on your build-out space, grand opening, pre-grand opening, all the rest, and training, et cetera, hiring your team and all of those things. So you just don't have to launch into the actual you know, startup thing. But there's also plenty of opportunities within single unit and multi-unit to buy existing franchises. So it's called a resale. Oftentimes, you know, similar to what Neil said, people they own a franchise for a period of time, and they want to sell it for whatever reason they want to sell it, and you can go in and buy an existing franchise. There's some nuances to how you buy it. You can't just make that transaction with the seller. You have to work with the franchisor. They have to approve you and some other things. But you can buy an existing operating business, both as a single unit or multi-unit. Multi-unit is nothing more than a single unit multiple times. And so you can buy, you know, 3 to 5 locations, or 10, or 110, 310. You know, it just depends on the system. And so one of the things you want to consider when you're buying is, you know, what is the financial business model that you're buying into? Can one location make you enough money, you know, that you want to make? If not, you might have to become multi-unit. Then is the model conducive to multi-unit? How difficult is it for you to span your span of control and those sorts of things? Mumbo, or multi-unit brand, multi-brand operator, is kind of referred to as a mumbo. A lot of times people are doing this. They might buy, say, 2 or 3 different brands, multi-unit. And so they, for example, could buy, Amazing Lash and an Elements massage along with a dry bar, or a handful of each. And so there's different ways that you can kind of do that. And I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to go really fast through the rest and be around. But an RD would be you're buying the rights. So you're kind of like buying the rights to an area, and then you're helping the franchisor solicit new franchisees, and then you're supporting those franchisees in the market. And usually in exchange for that, it's a separate franchise agreement. Usually in exchange for that, you get a share of the initial franchise fee and the ongoing royalties in order to do that. And then a master franchise, those are typically done internationally, I suppose, not always, but typically. And you're essentially this is a direct relationship. You're actually selling the franchise agreement and signing it with a franchisee versus the franchisor. You become the franchisor in that sense. So all the others, you're kind of more in the RD, you're not a direct relationship with the franchisee. So let's talk about some different steps. If you're looking to buy a franchise, these are common steps you're going to go through. And I just want to kind of bring them up because, if you're thinking about ETA and using franchise as a model or a pathway to doing that, you want to know what to expect. And first off, before you even start this entire thing, very, very, very important that you've done your own homework on yourself. You have to ask yourself, why do you want to own a business? Because if you don't know why you want to own a business, you probably shouldn't buy a business or start a business. But you got to understand why, and you got to know what you're trying to get out of it, and really narrow down your focus. I think, a lot of times people say, well, I'm looking for a passive investment. Well, passive is a very subjective term. Does what I'm buying require an owner-operator? Or is it more conducive for me to be able to build it up to a certain level and then be able to bow out? Are you going to have an operating partner? What type of industry are you interested in? Is there any kind of passion or underlying thing that you really want to do? Those are all questions you want to ask before you even start this process. And you can do some research, and you can hire a broker, or you can talk with people. There's a lot of things you can do. But before you initially inquire or fill out an application with a franchise system, you won't go very far if you don't have the answers to those questions. You also have to understand your financial capability and what you're wanting to get out of it financially as well. Because, if you have, say, $250,000, well, there's plenty of franchise options you could buy, but it's not going to be a Chick-fil-A, as an example. And they're, it's just going to cost way too much, and they're very tight on their process. The intro call or disclosure, usually there's going to be a first intro call, and really that's your opportunity to really dive in. Keep in mind the franchisor, they're screening you. Some more scrutinized than others, but they're screening you. They're trying to figure out, are you going to be a good fit to our brand? Do we want to welcome you in to our brand? Because if they don't, you can really you can be very harmful. And this is a contractual interdependent relationship. I have to rely on you, and you have to rely on me as a franchisor or franchisee, so to speak. And so, this is an important piece of that, but this is your time to really understand what's the profile of a successful franchisee in the system, and compare that against how do you fit that profile. What is the business model, and compare that to what you're looking for. What is the success rate? What's the and they're not going to be able to share everything. There's nuances here, but you're really trying to identify, is it even worth having another conversation? They're also going to do what they call disclosure. They're going to give you a copy of the franchise disclosure document, and this is the regulated side of things. They have to give that to you. You sign a non-binding receipt page that says, I got this. And the reason that you do that is, by law, you have to wait 14 days before you're allowed to sign a franchise agreement. They don't want people making hasty decisions in the process. And every FDD is the same in structure. Whether you're buying a McDonald's or you're buying a no-name franchise that you've never heard of, Item 7 is going to give you the estimated initial cost. For example, how much do we think on average it's going to cost me? And it's usually a range to open one of these businesses. Item 19 is going to give you, for example, their franchise or their sales claims. You know, how well is the system performing? And that can be communicated in a variety of different ways. So you want to know what you're looking for and how to read those types of things. Item 20 is going to give you a list of all the units and what the growth has been, how many have opened, how many have closed, how many have transferred. The contact information for every franchisee in the system, whether they are still operating or have closed or transferred. And you know, a variety of other things within, and then one of the exhibits is always the franchise agreement. And so you're going to have that. So they're going to disclose that to you. You want to start to review that. I would recommend a franchise attorney to review that. Not just your buddy who's an attorney. Get a franchise attorney to review that. But you want to know, what are the terms of this relationship, and is it going to make sense for me? Then sometimes they'll do an FDD review call, and that's just an opportunity really for you to get on a phone and ask some more detailed questions about the FDD, clarification questions, stuff like that. I would say that you know, one of the other misconceptions is you can't negotiate a franchise agreement. That's not necessarily true. Depending on the size and maturity of the franchise system, there's ability to negotiate. And even in some of the most mature systems, you can negotiate on things like territory or term. You know, but in general, a system's a system for a reason, and they're not going to negotiate all kinds of varieties of things because they're trying to keep uniformness throughout the system to protect. These aren't there to protect, to be like handcuffing you. They're there to protect your investment because you bought this model, and if we allow everyone in the system to start running their own model, then it erodes your brand value. You start to lose that value. Validation, this is one of the most critical pieces in the process. Validation is really an opportunity to talk to other franchisees and things that franchisors won't say or can't say. This is a great area to get it. You know, talk to franchisees. Would you do it again? You know, what kind of support? How trusting? Do you feel like you can trust? Would you do, if you know, how many locations do you have? How much money do you make? How long did it take you to get to profitability? Those are all questions that are tricky to ask of a franchisor unless it's disclosed in their item 19, because if it's not, they can't tell you. Even if they know, they can't tell you. But a franchisee can. And so it gives you a chance to kind of dig deeper into some of those burning questions you might have that a franchisor might not ask. And then, you know, there's what they call Discovery Day or Meet the Team Day. That's where you'll fly out, usually to the corporate office, get to meet the whole team, go into a deeper dive into the operations, and really start to culminate, is this going to be a good fit or not? And if it is, you move to signing the franchise agreement. Now, these are high-level steps, all the details that are, you know, how they execute on that. Is it a phone call? Is it a Zoom call? Is it an in-person meeting? Are there multiple other steps inside? Every concept has their own process, but it's typically going to look something like this. So a couple key takeaways. Franchising offers a structured path to ETA. Not all franchises or franchisees are created equal. You got to know what you're looking for, and you want to make sure that it aligns with that. Lower risk doesn't mean no risk. Franchises aren't proven necessarily, and just because you buy one doesn't mean you're going to succeed. You're going to accept perhaps a lower risk than startup, but not no risk. Ownership is a business. It's not a passive investment. And you do have control. You have control of the day-to-day. You're responsible for everything that happens inside of that business. In a franchise, you are limited to the brand standards. You have to follow those. You can't change the colors. You can't change the products necessarily without permission, things like that. And then you know, use the right, I would recommend you use the right resources when making your decision. You know, talk with people. There's people in the room, but talk with people about what are the funding options. talk with people about what types of franchises exist, learn to understand, am I getting into an owner-operator model, or am I getting into one that's more conducive to being able to build it up and then exit? Talk to, brokers, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of resources. There's lots of attorneys. There's lots of others that can help. Lean on those people. Don't just fly it alone. So a couple of resources. First off, I run the Liniger Center on franchising now. Started that about 2 years ago. Dave and Gail Liniger are the founders of RE/MAX. They donated some money to start the center here on campus. We're one of only less than a few, I think there's less than 5 universities that offer a significant franchise education program. We're one of those, and we're the only one, I think, of its kind west of the Mississippi River. Most of them are on the East Coast, most notably maybe Louisville, that's run by Yum Brands. So if you want information about the Liniger Center, there's there and some pamphlets in the back. Second thing is the FTC put out a consumer's guide to buying a franchise. There's lots of good tips and steps for how to buy a franchise and things to consider when buying a franchise. This is done by the regulatory agency, and so it gives some pretty good guidance on what to look for and what to be on the look for, I guess, as you're approaching that. Franchise Business Review. Franchise Business Review is a third-party company that basically reviews franchise concepts, and they rank engagement of franchisees. So how engaged are the franchisees on a variety of different levels to really show how different franchise systems stack up against each other. And if you have a bunch of disengaged franchisees, it means there's probably a lot of conflict and other things happening. Maybe want to be careful how you proceed in there. But Franchise Business Review is a good resource, and they also have a rankings list for the top engagement. Entrepreneur Magazine puts out a Franchise 500 every year. They break this down by fastest growing. They break it down by industry. They break it down by a variety of different things, new, et cetera, et cetera. So there's international, there's all kinds of different breakdowns, but the total list would be 500, and it's the top 500 franchise systems in the market. I don't know what their algorithm is to judge that. I've tried to figure it out. I can't figure it out. I can tell you things like Jazzercise still exist on the top 500, and other brands that you might think should be on there aren't on there. So I don't know what the algorithm is, but it's a good overview of franchise concepts that are out there. And then there's some franchise acronyms. They're not limited to franchise, but these are in your booklet. And then I'll just leave you with one last thing. The franchise disclosure document that I mentioned is such a critical part of franchising. If you go to certain states, like I found the most easy one to use is Wisconsin. If you go to the Secretary of State of Wisconsin's website and just do Secretary of State Wisconsin franchise search, for example, and you type in the name of the brand that you're looking for, if they're registered to sell franchises in Wisconsin, then you'll be able to access and download anyone's FDD. And so it's a really good way to kind of do some preliminary research. If you're just wanting to tinker around without talking to anybody, you can go in and start to see, how much is it going to look at their item 7, look at their audited financials, et cetera, et cetera. All that's going to be in there, so you can have it for download. There's other states like California, for example, that are more difficult, but I'll leave you with that. So I'll be around if you have questions, but in the meantime, I want to introduce you to, Carolyn Ryan. And she's going to come up and talk about the broker perspective when it comes to ETA.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. So yes, I'm Carolyn Ryan. I am a founding partner at Ascent Business Brokers and Advisors. You'll hear in your journey as buyers, you'll hear brokers, advisors, intermediaries. It's really an interchangeable term on what we do, and we're here to facilitate on behalf of a seller or on behalf of a buyer the purchase of a business. We also, we do, our tagline is sell, buy, grow. And we like to be there with owner-operators at whatever stage they are in the cycle of owning a business. The thing that we care deeply about, and Neil alluded, or maybe Joshua, was this is a space that's important in our economy. The big business has its place, and so does the small and medium-sized business space. And so our mission is in helping business owners shepherd their business to a new owner with an optimal exit, something that's successful and satisfactory to them, as well as the buyer getting a hold of a business with a strong foundation. So we work to help facilitate that process. We have been, I've been doing this for about 8 years now. One of my original partners had been doing it for 40 years. It's been said before, this is not new in the sense of buying a business is not new. The public platform, the public marketplace has been around for a very long time, but you're in a very good place now in that there is more formalized, more refined systems and research and academia and workshops and community around this process. And really, a rising tide raises all boats. And so this is good for you as buyers, and it's good for the sellers. And so you're in the good place, is what I'd like to say. So I'm just going to go through what I have observed on behalf of buyers, whether I'm representing the sell side or the buy side, what I have seen and what I recommend that you all keep your eye on and your eyes out for. And the first part is the deal flow, finding those opportunities in businesses to buy. Now, you can go direct outreach. If you know a business and like a business, you can certainly reach out to that owner and say, are you interested in buying? You have to be very careful with that. You don't want to do that with an employee in the room, or you don't want to call an employee and say, does your owner want to sell? And then they might wonder that themselves. So the harsh truth is, though, that we as brokers also, that's what we're looking for, is businesses that are willing and interested in selling. So we all share in this challenge. And we get emails every day from buyers who say, we are interested in a business of this size, we want to pay this range of price, we're looking for certain industries. Can you please let me know when something comes up? And I wish I could say yes, but the really harsh truth is that I really cannot. And we've explored it, but while technology exists and automations exist, we can't solve for the human element in that. And you as buyers are very transient. The buyer pool is transient overall. You're either finding what you've looked for, you're changing what you're looking for, or you take yourself out of the market and you're no longer there. So to look for the businesses outside of direct outreach on your own, I would advise to look out for those public platforms like BizBuySell, BizQuest. They can be messy. They're public platforms, and some of it on there is either sold by an owner, it's badly priced, it's actually not sellable, it's not profitable. There's a lot of messy stuff in there. But on the brokerage side, that's where we find probably 90+% of our buyers. And so it's effective, it's streamlined, it's a clearinghouse of opportunities. You can go into these sites and put in filters, you can do notifications, and that's where the central opportunity is to find the deals, where and in what area you're interested in. The other thing I would recommend is just use a Google alert. Go to brokerage sites that you know and trust, go to their listings page, do a Google alert that says, please let me know on a regular basis, on a timely basis, or on if the page has anything new to it, have it let you know, and then you control whether you turn that off or not. And then we don't have to give you an empty promise of reaching out to you when something changes. So the next few slides, I'm just gonna advise that you as you're going through this process, you collect your advisory team in advance, hopefully, before you get, and in this way you You learn more about what you don't know. You have some professionals on your side. You can learn more about the process and be shored up with that support as you start looking for those opportunities. The transaction lawyer is critical in this transaction, and not all deals are created equal. And generally speaking, we're working in the small business space. And like it was said, maybe it's a $250,000 in revenue, maybe it's 5 million plus. But for the most part in that space, the deals are asset purchase agreements. There are some stock or interest transfer deals, but for the most part, they're asset purchase agreements. Find a lawyer who's done those, who's done many of those, who knows the space in terms of the size and scale of this deal. You don't need a fancy M&A lawyer. Those are stock sales typically. They're very large agreements, and it doesn't mean that your interest and the interest of the seller aren't going to be protected. That's what this agreement is about. But it can be simplified, and the lawyers that know what they're doing can do it well. They can do it in a protective manner, but it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. The next one is as a tax accountant. You as a buyer will be buying presumably a bundle of assets that lend toward the revenue and the profit of this business. And this bundle of assets may be tangible and or intangible. And the tax accountant will know how those assets should be allocated and what the implications of that are, what your tax burden might be, and or what your tax savings could be. You also want to understand the IRS, the Form 8594, which you won't remember, and I never do, and I always have to look it up. But it's an important filing that you do on the year of your purchase and the event that is also reciprocated by the buyer, the seller. And this is going to reflect how you've allocated those assets. And your filing and the seller's filing should match, and if they don't match, it might trigger an audit. So while you're going through the development of this agreement, you'll want to, with your transaction lawyer and with your accountant, you'll want to establish how you're going to allocate those and how those are going to be filed with the IRS. If you're getting a lender, most people are, you'll want to understand how that works. You'll want to find somebody that you will and can work with, and it doesn't have to be just one. Meet a few, because once the deal comes around, you can still talk to them. But it helps you to understand what you can afford. What kind of down payment can you really afford to put down? What kind of collateral do you have to back that up in security? And what does debt service coverage ratio mean? And what does it practically mean to your well-being as you buy a business? We're all in this to make a living. And to understand how that debt service will impact your cash flow and what you'll have left in order to live the life to which you aspire is really critically important. I mean, this is the bottom line. And allowing for the growth and things that you want to invest in the business and what's going to be left. The interesting thing in this is that in the time that I've been doing this, and even referencing my older partner who'd been doing this for decades, it's been known or commonly understood that sellers have brokers. They have somebody on their side throughout the entire process. We work with them from A to Z. And it's been kind of a common understanding that buyers don't. But then you're thinking, well, why not? That's kind of crazy. I mean, the lawyer's not going to be there the whole way, presumably. The accountant won't, and the lender won't. And so who are you going to have on your side? So I would just submit that whether it's a broker like me, or if it's a family member that knows what they're doing or has done it before, or a mentor, get some help. Have somebody there by your side, step by step. Have somebody else who can be some eyes and ears in the room as well. 1 + 1 = 3, in my humble opinion. I think to have somebody else looking at the opportunity to look at the financials, to ask questions that you may not think about. It's exponentially better. We're working, again, in this entrepreneurial, owner-operated, privately owned space. It's very personal to those sellers. They have built a business over years, if not decades. They're turning over their baby, they're turning over their employees and their customers, and something that they care very deeply about. I would ask that you keep that in mind from the very beginning. And I know that this is a financial decision, but it's also a very relational decision. And as you set out in this process and you're asking for financials and you're asking for the SIM or the offering summary, the information memorandum, that's within reason, and it's to be expected that you're asking for information that will help you to evaluate this. But from the beginning, please don't go to the broker or the seller and just, blurt out, I have a list of 20 questions. First of all, read the SIM, read the offering summary to really see what they've already provided, and rather than come back with questions that has already been answered. And then ask for a conversation, hopefully a video. It doesn't have to be in person at start, but a video conversation to see the owner in person and to start building a relationship and making it relational. It makes a huge difference. In fact, if you don't, that's a red flag, and it's a turnoff to the seller. They want to know that you want to know them. They want to visualize you in the business. They want to understand that you're trying to visualize yourself in the business. And this is a long game. This can take months to get to closing, and then thereafter you have a transition and a training period and maybe a seller financing relationship. So you are building a relationship, and you, from the start, should start and keep that in mind as far as building that rapport, building the trust, building the foundation of what this relationship will be. And frankly, you'll find out if you like them and that you can work together. It's for you as much as it is for them. This is a reciprocal thing for sure. Transparency, I think, is important. We, at least in our firm, try to be very transparent about what the financial snapshot that we're providing, what the add-back adjustments are, and where that value is coming from. It is well within reason for you to ask for that kind of information. If they're not providing that right there, that's a red flag. Once you get that, once you start building that rapport and you start asking the questions and you decide what you believe the value is, and believe me, value is not a pinpointed number. There are so many variables to it, and we as brokers know, the sellers know that it's not a singular point. And so the value in the eye of the buyer may change. And as you're coming to that conclusion or making that assessment, in having that conversation and making an offer for, if they're asking $2 million and you want to offer less, why? Be frank about it. Be fair. Be transparent. Say, look, I see you're doing this. This is where these things are happening operationally. These are the value drivers, but these are some things that I'm concerned about. And it all goes also back to this relationship and building this good faith. If you're operating in good faith and with transparency and being frank and candid and collaborative about this discussion, it just goes easier. It's just more friendly, and then you set off on a good foundation. Working capital is one of the deal terms that it's squishy, and it's interesting in this space because when you're in lower value businesses, maybe trading at the 2.5 time multiples, working capital sometimes just doesn't come up. It's just not there. But it does as the deals get bigger. And working capital, academically speaking, that's current assets minus current liabilities. And more kind of functionally, it's what's in cash, what's in inventory, what's in accounts receivable, less maybe like prepaid deposits, that you still need to deliver on, or accounts payable. So you're looking at literally what's the working capital of keeping the engine running. The nuance to it, though, is that there's also a further distinction of thinking about what is truly operating working capital, and that's a relative term because you're saying for what period of time, which months, and it might be 3 months upon closing of the business. Like, what gas in the tank do you need as part of those assets to keep the business running? And working capital is part of that bundle of assets to a degree, not all of it necessarily. And that's where the distinction is between the operating working capital and maybe some excess working capital, and working with the seller and the broker to determine what that excess is and how that's calculated. And when I say excess, it just might be that they park a bunch of their cash in the bank, but that's not needed to keep the business running, or they might have excess inventory or obsolete inventory or overbought inventory, such things like that. So what I'm recommending is keep working capital in mind, even bring it up at the LOI stage, the letter of intent stage. This is an offer, it's not binding, but it proposes an approach to working capital that makes it easier on the process of negotiating and coming to a final deal if it's brought up in advance, because it will come up eventually, and if you don't bring it up early, it'll come up later, and it just trips things up occasionally. Price is very important to a seller, clearly. They want to realize the value that they've built, but it's not everything, and sometimes there's relativity in there. They care about when they're going to get the money, how they're going to get the money. They care about what's going to be required of them to transition and how long. Can they be around for 90 days, or do they have to stick around for a year? I didn't even say on here, but also a non-compete. Most sellers that I talk to, they're like, I don't want it. I don't want to touch it. Go away. I'll sign anything. But there are others that are not, maybe they're not baby boomers. Maybe they're Gen X and they still have a little bit in them and they're ready to do something else. And they don't maybe want to leave the industry altogether. So that's also something that matters to them. They also very much care about their employees and their customers and their vendors, and they want to know how you're going to go about taking care of those. Now, this is an ongoing concern that you're buying, and the interesting kind of contrast is that the buyer is always worried about whether the employees are going to stay. And you should be, and you should think about how you're going to incentivize them to stay, and that you're going to show up from day one and be there for them and make sure you can make payroll and all of that. But the other side of that is when they learn that this business has been sold, and they don't typically learn, and maybe the key employees learn earlier, but the employees typically don't learn until the closing is done. And so it's surprise to them. And so their fear is, am I still going to have a job? And so the seller and the buyer, or the sell side, or the old and the new employee, I'm saying that wrong, but you know what I mean. They're afraid of losing their job, and the buyer is afraid that they're going to leave. So there's a place to come to in the middle, and it's about communicating. And it's about talking to the seller to understand to what degree these things matter to them. And it's all, again, part of building that rapport and building that trust and helping them visualize you being in that place. Because part of this is you're evaluating them, they're evaluating you. We, if we're doing our jobs as brokers, as seller brokers, is we're putting them in front of as many buyers as we possibly can. And so to some degree, you have to put yourself forth as the best option for them. And it may not be only the price. It may be those other things. You as entrepreneurs have advantages as entrepreneurs. They are entrepreneurs, they've built this business, they can better visualize you as a person coming into the business, taking over for them. They can't, most of them can't quite get their head around or feel like it's good for them or their business to have private equity or a strategic. Now, in some cases they do, and that's what they want, and that's what's best for their business at the stage it's in, but not not always. And so if that's the advantage that you have, use it and lean into it and be that person, be personal, be relational. The opposite side, the opposite piece of that is, of course, the strategics and the private equity, they may have some efficiencies to fold into the business. And so immediately on day one with redundancies, profitability is better. They're buying some revenue. So the value in their eyes is better. And in their hands, it's a better business and they will pay more for that. So that is what you're up against. But again, the buyer simply might like you, the seller. The seller might very much like you better than kind of an organizational buyer. This was mentioned too, and I think this is a common theme, is to say, this isn't easy. It's not a passive investment, as they've said. You're not walking in and finding arm's length management. That's a needle in a haystack, to find something that you can walk into and have everybody working on it and in it on your behalf, and you can go to the beach. It just doesn't happen that way most of the time. You have to get in there face to face, boots on the ground, hands on, get to know the employees, get to know those customers, get to know the vendors, scrub line for line, scrub the revenue items, scrub those expense items, understand what levers exist on any piece of it to understand what you can do to grow the business. But if you want to eventually grow it, and we hope you do, grow it to be where you can be more hands-off and arm's length, plan to be there for a good 2 years in and on the business. Am I on time? Quick story. I think it was Neil's slide that had the mom and baby and mama and papa bear bed, and I thought that was funny because we didn't talk about this, but I was also going to talk about the small, medium, and large. There are really good opportunities out there, and I just, as an example, sold 3 trade businesses in the last year, and they were viable businesses with happy buyers, a lot of growth opportunity. The small business was one guy. He did a trade. He did it himself with 2 guys. He never let them be that by themselves. He did all his back office work himself. It was small. It traded for a small multiple, but it was a really good opportunity for this buyer and a really low cost of entry. And they got into something that he could really appreciably build over time. The middle guy did a lot of his work, but he also had other teams out there, also did his back office, but it was kind of a middle ground. And it sold for more, and it sold for a higher multiple. And again, this buyer was very happy, and there's a lot of room for improvements with systems and just growth. And then the third guy he was a painter. He had a painting business. He was not a painter. He never touched a paintbrush ever. He built all the systems. He built the business development. He worked on keeping his crews happy. He worked on networking and networks, and he sold for a better multiple. And this is also a very happy buyer, and it's a more sophisticated business. But I guess my point is that there are a lot of opportunities out there at any size. Make it fit with what fits for you, and I wish you success. Thank you for your time. I was supposed to mention, I apologize. I was supposed to mention that there's a 15-minute break. Now, not in, sorry.
Yeah, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll start right at 10:15. I'm going to put a QR code up on the screen. It's just a quick survey, just to learn about who you are, why you're here, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. But thank you. We'll be back in 15. Oh, welcome back. We're going to get started. A couple just quick housekeeping notes. The next 2 speakers, our final 2 speakers, the format will change a little bit. Our next speaker coming up, he will speak for a little bit, and then we are going to have Q&A from the audience. So we'll have a couple mics to pass around, so if you have any questions. And then at the end of the event, which the speaking ends at 12:30, we'll go until 1:30 for those that want to hang around and talk to any of the speakers and network, but everybody will still be here. So I realize in the first 3 speakers we didn't have Q&A, but they will be available to answer any questions that you may have. So our next speaker is an adjunct professor here at the University of Denver, and also a serial ETAer. I think it's the first time I've ever said that. So please welcome Sean Kearns to the stage.
Thanks, Josh. And just a quick shout out to what Josh, you and Neil and whoever else is doing at DU to lean into ETA. I think it's super smart and also exciting. And I couldn't agree more. Kevin, I thought your presentation on franchising isn't anything I've ever thought of about as an ETA option, but like no brainer to have for your first opportunity a sort of a playbook or a roadmap. I think it's really great. And then Carolyn, I loved all of your advice on how to think about a seller. As a buyer, how I should think about a seller. So I'm going to do my best to deliver value to you guys in my presentation. A little bit of it's my history, but that's just for context. I'm going to probably try and speak quickly because I'm a little bit intimidated by the time. I'm good at talking a lot, going over, and so apologize for trying to speak quickly, but I want to leave time for questions at the end. So my first piece of advice, always be wary of someone like me standing up here telling you how you should do something. It's like I equate this process a lot like finding your spouse. What works for me may be remarkably different in what works for you, okay? And so I'd advise you to take this as a data point, a guideline, something to test, something to reject if you think it doesn't apply, and I think that's awesome. It's just sort of rolling around in this to see how it can be something that fits for you. Welcome to those of you who are students in the private equity class. I see a couple over here. You've seen this diagram. It's true of all acquisitions, and I don't care if this is buying a company for $15 billion or buying something for $250,000. You have to find and close the deal, which is our little handshake icon. You have to pay for it somehow, and then you have to add value afterwards. Okay, and I bring this up. I like to simplify things to sort of dissect them, break them apart, and know how to how I can sort of make sure I get it all encapsulated in my thoughts and strategy. And here's the thing about ETAers is you got to do them all. Each one of these responsibilities is yours. And the crazy thing is that the skill sets for all of these are very different. It's knowing how to close a sale and talk to a customer is different than knowing how to raise money to acquire something. But you're signing up for all of that when you're doing it. And so for me, what I'm going to try and cover today is the basics of all 3 of those activities as it relates to acquiring a company, and then do a little bit of the self-check. Is this right for you? And so it's not for everybody, not for the faint of heart, but for those of us who have it in our blood, it's the only option. And so for those of you who it's not a fit, I'd love to help you understand that. If it is a fit, I'd love to help you learn how to think about it into actionable items. Brief, quick hit on my bio. I promise not to sit here and pound my chest. That's not what this is about. This is about giving context for later components in the slide. I grew up not far from here, a few miles from here, went to the East Coast for college, a little school called Lafayette College that looks a whole lot like DU. Small, super beautiful campus, engaged people. I always knew I wanted to come back to Colorado, but man, graduation came too fast. I was having too much fun, and all my buddies were, I was the only kid from Colorado, by the way, at Lafayette. All my buddies were going to New York to get jobs, so that's what I did. Very grateful for the experience. I ended up at what is now Chase Manhattan Bank, financing doing the debt component of private equity acquisitions, okay? And these are acquisitions. I think the smallest one we did may have been 25 million. The biggest was several hundred million. This is back in the 90s. And so private equity was sort of just figuring itself out. The middle market where I played was a catch-all, a little bit of an afterthought, okay? And so for me, that allowed me to be a generalist. And you'll see the companies that I've acquired don't fit together by any industry or other rational thing, but I've loved my experience at Chase and looking at lots of businesses. Realized that I wanted to be an operator, not a deal guy. So I went to Dartmouth's business school to make that transition. I was also ready to come back to Colorado. And I actually wrote my entrance essay to Dartmouth on what is now ETA. Basically, my essay was, the question is, what do you want to do with your life? I want to come back to Colorado and find a company to buy. And I spent, admittedly, stepping back, I did a deal. One of the deals that I did when I was at Chase was a roll-up of auto part manufacturing, or auto part components, mostly in the exhaust system. And there was a guy named Charlie who was leading this roll-up and loved him. He went to Tuck, and I remembered that when I wrote his bio for the offering documents. So I, between my first and second year, I called him and I said, "Hey, Charlie, remember me? I'm the guy that helped you find your, finance this business. You should hire me." And I was expecting to have overcome all of his objections on why he was not going to hire me. And he said, "Great, you have to go spend the summer in my plant in Dyersburg, Tennessee." And I didn't have that on my list of overcoming objections. I wanted to go sit with him in Chicago. So anyway, I ended up in Dyersburg, Tennessee. But Charlie had airplanes, and he'd fly down and he'd pick me up and he'd take me to the other division. And we would talk over the summer, and he said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "I want to buy companies just like you." And he said, "Okay, well, you find one and I'll help you pay for it." And so I'm like, this just got a lot more interesting. My whole second year of business school, I was negotiating to buy a business that sells beautiful stone in Aspen. 16,000 square foot homes made out of stone. That was going to be me. And I was looking down my nose at all my classmates that were going to work for Goldman Sachs or, all the other awesome places. And I was going to go be my own boss and live in Aspen and be the coolest man in America. And then my deal fell apart. And I'm like, oh, crap. They're smarter than me because they have a paycheck, and I just have a student loan coming due here in a couple of months. So I called Charlie. I said, "Hey, the deal's off. I got to go find a job." And he said, "Well, I got this other company over here. It's half private equity owned, half public. It's called Health Fitness Corporation. It's a real pig. We may not make payroll in 3 weeks, but come up here. You can figure that out, and I'll give you a 6-month commitment." I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go do that. Got nothing else to do. Health Fitness is still, they manage fitness centers for Fortune 500 companies. Super cool company. It's not the body image fitness, it's health and wellness for employees fitness. Loved it. It had been messed up by the founder, shouldn't have been public, and we cleaned it up. We lost the 10K that I read to learn about the company, had a loss of about $4 million on my watch. Was the 10K that I signed and submitted to the SEC, we had $1 million in profit, which was awesome. So just value creation as an operator, and great experience learning to play with live bullets, other people's risk, right? I hadn't written a check to buy this company. I tried, and they didn't actually want me to buy it for a variety of reasons. But I got paid pretty handsomely out of that value creation to come back to Colorado and find a company to buy. Took me 3 years, but I found a World of Tile, retailer of tile and natural stone. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Did it 3 times with 3 different private equity groups. The first one, we bought it January 1st of 2004 with a private equity group that I met here. I'll tell you about more about that, but met them at DU. We bought it with the goal of making it a much bigger than just one city. We had 11 stores, all in Colorado. let's prove this works in 2 other major metropolitan areas, double EBITDA, and you got 5 years to do it. I love that mandate from the private equity group because I didn't have to think. It wasn't like the first real thing on my watch. I wanted it to be simple. We crushed it. We sold it for 3x what we bought it for in 24 months. That's not 27 months. So home run. Sold it to a private equity group out of New York. I was a seller and a buyer. I rolled half my economics into the new deal because we were going to go super regional, national, whatever. Ran right into the housing buzzsaw, the housing crisis, right? And we'd gone from 0% of revenue in Phoenix to 40% of our revenue, and almost overnight that went away. And so now it's crisis. I'm trying to figure out how to save my company again. Ultimately, the lender, the day Lehman fell, if you guys all remember where you were that day, I remember where I was. I was in the parking lot of University Hills, I don't know, buying a bucket of paint at Ace Hardware. The lender called and said, hey, I got $850 million worth of troubled loans. You're $13 million. You're not going to make it. You're a discretionary, high-ticket housing product. Housing market's in crisis. You got 90 days. This is kind of a courtesy call. If you can buy us out, great. If not, we're going to shut you down. So I knew how to buy and sell companies. They just set the price when they said we're going to shut you down, was liquidation value. So found some local turnaround investors and we bought it again, which was awesome. And with the blessing of the bank, and everyone wanted me to do that. Ran it kind of successfully for a while. We were growing sort of 5 to 15% a year. And then in 2015, 16, something like that, some really smart guy took specialty manufacturing. Tile, turns out, is hard to make look pretty. Put inkjet technology into tile glazing machine and made it photocopying. All of it went to China. My average retail price was $5 a foot, went to $250 and broke my business model. And so I won't make this presentation about what it takes to wind down a business, but it sucks. I bring it up to say that it's real, right? And there's a lot of romance associated with ETA. That sucks, right? It's kind of like I want to marry this amazing woman, which is going to spend the rest of my life. Well, if you're getting divorced, you didn't dream of that. It sucks. So try and find a business that doesn't have the risk profile to lead you to this kind of outcome, okay? 2019, I ended up coming back for air, gonna go buy another company, thinking, hey, where can I find companies where the price is reasonable? I think Carolyn mentioned price is super important. If you have competition, price goes up. I like no competition. I like not overpaying. I had this idea where venture capitalists, they make 10 bets. They expect 2 or 3 to hit. For them, hitting means doubling each year. Only 2 or 3 do that. And so the 6 or 7 that were smart bets that didn't double each year are candidates for me to buy. So bought one that's called Worklead. It's now called Strong Arm Technologies. It's a really cool digital training company helping frontline workers avoid injury. Amazing customer list, Penske, Walmart, all these kind of companies. I'm still on the board, still the second largest shareholder, but I stepped down at the merger with Strong Arm, and I have my third company now under contract, which is their distinct company, which is in pet services. So step 1, finding your company. Establish your criteria. You gotta figure out what you wanna buy, and this is an iterative process. You have to go through it. We're gonna talk about peeling back layers, testing your thesis. I put Tuckerman Capital up there. They're a private equity group that I love. I know the guys who run it. They, on their website, have their criteria established in a remarkably clear way, the best presentation I've seen. And so as you're establishing your criteria, I'd invite you to go look at theirs to see how they've laid it out. This is their quantitative one. They have also got a whole qualitative list of investment criteria. For me, after business school, I expected actually to partner with private equity. And my comment on some of the things you've heard before, I would say opens with my opening comment. A lot of this is fuzzy, and if you buy a bigger company, you probably are going to need a partner to help fund you. It's probably going to look like private equity. It melds together, it blurs. There's no sort of rigid size range that says this is private equity, this isn't. The plumbing business that Neil was referencing, there are 1 million people, big private equity groups doing roll-ups now, so everyone's everywhere, okay? Although I generally agree that companies, don't want to be misinterpreted, companies that have less than 5 million in revenue probably are safer bets that private equity won't be playing there. For me, I wanted EBITDA over $1.5 million. I wanted high margins, easily scalable, and low purchase price. Simple enough. You don't see, for me, any industry thing there. I just wanted to buy right. And then for the VC cast-off strategy that I developed and pursued in 2019, Series A or B company that hasn't hit the mark for VC investors, customers tell me that it works. In my diligence, this is a new concept. I'm not going to ask the founder, does it work? Because of course they think it does. Hey, customer, have you used this product for a long time, and would you buy it again? Okay. The solution works as is. I don't want to buy a half-built car. It doesn't have to be an amazing luxury car, but it needs to get me down the road today because I need to have profits, sell more. You get the point. Line of sight to cash flow positive. I'm going to talk about this one here in a second. But for me, I believe if your business is losing money, you're dependent on someone to fund it. If you're profitable, you can live to fight another day, okay? I also needed to understand it. I don't have a tech background, so pretty smart guy. I can sort of figure things out, but there's lots of things out there that are just over my head and too big a risk for me to take as a company to invest in. Once again, low purchase price. You're going to hear me all the time talking about that. You can live or die by the price you pay for a company. You saw these Biz Buy Sell and First Business Broke FBB group. They're out of, I think, Colorado Springs. They post their listings. Carolyn's website has other businesses that you can consider. I would encourage you very strongly to evaluate the businesses on those things to establish your criteria. Okay, and my exercise with this was, okay, I'm going to go click on the next business, whatever it is, and I'm going to say, I'm buying that company. Now I'm going to spend 20 minutes and figure out what I like and don't like it as if that was my only business opportunity. And it helped me really flush out, redefine the types of businesses that I was willing to look at and the ones that I wanted to pass on. You may find businesses there too, but I think it's more of a, well, we'll talk about that later. So here's the next, like I said, you got to peel back the layers of your investment criteria, constantly refine, test, find someone else that is going to help you think about this. This is a copy of a P&L projection provided, I don't even remember which company it is, provided by a Series A or B venture capital company. And my thesis was there's good companies in there. They're going 20 or 30%, not 100%, so I can buy them, and that was validated. This P&L says, well, wait a minute. They're all losing money. They're losing a bunch of money, right? Well, inherent in venture capital strategy is you got to double every year, which means today's cost structure has to actually really be here to support next year's revenue, okay? The cost structure is associated with expectations of 100% growth rate. You don't need this cost structure to have a 20%, 15% growth rate, okay? And so I already told you I have a little bit of experience with turnarounds and rationalizing cost structures. So this was a validation for me that, number one, it's within my scope of capabilities, but also there's not going to be a lot of people vying for a business. I mean, this one, I think if you look at it, it's got something like 6 million, or well, at the end of 2022, they're expecting to have 8 million in revenue and lose 13 million, right? There's not a lot of people competing for that. And I know how to, if you look at it also, it's, I think circled number 4 there, there's 6 million invested in sales and marketing. Okay, so it's not like a massive layoff of people that are integral to the business. It's your marketing spend. We can trim that, okay? So anyway, this is, I bring this up to show you how I tested my investment criteria, validated it, threw some things out. It went even further than this, by the way, I'll tell you, learning about venture lenders. So if anyone wants to talk to me about that later, happy to. Point of this is stack the deck. You want to seek limited competition, and I'm going to encourage you to look for businesses. I think Carolyn, Neil referenced some of this. Companies where there is no management succession, you're an answer, okay? And there may be management succession, good leaders that aren't capable of buying it. They're awesome to have on your team, and maybe you want them to be owners, but there's no one here who can really run this company. They're a great place for ETAers to hunt, because the management, if they're motivated, is in a pickle, okay? Then be wary of adverse selection. Hard deals are awesome. If you're the only one at the table making an offer, you can usually dictate the price, but it may be limited competition for a reason, and so that's what diligence is for, okay? Sourcing your deal, everyone says, how do you find it? And I've got a list of things here that say are recommended avenues to pursue. It's a numbers game. You got to talk to everybody, okay? It's kind of like dating. How do you find the partner for your rest of your life? Get out there, right? Do something. If you like to hike, go hiking. If you like to, you want to go to the bar and meet somebody, do that. But get out there, okay? And the reason I've got 5 cups of coffee listed here, someone gave me this advice that I would happily pass on or recommend to you. You got to have 5 intentional meetings on your calendar with new people to tell your story and ask for help every 2 weeks, okay? So make it a to-do. I only got 3 cups of coffee scheduled in the next 2 weeks. I got to go find 2 more. And you can allow yourself this. I think it's an actionable, well, for me, it was a really actionable thing to go do. And my criteria are anyone, okay? Worklead, the company that I acquired, the VC Castoff, a buddy of mine from business school was the chief operating officer, okay? If I hadn't had a cup of coffee with him, wouldn't have found it. So get out there. Diligence, there's a lot of, I think I've seen people go through motions. Oh, okay, I got to go through a supplier review. And I looked at a list. Yep, I know we have 22 suppliers. I know that 18 of them are critical. Looked at it, great. Well, put your critical lens on it and say, I need to answer 2 questions. Is this a good company? Meaning, can I do what I expect to do with this? What are the chances of that? What can go wrong? If things do go wrong, what's likely to happen, okay? And then, is it a good price? And the good price is going to be dictated by a couple of things. If you have partners, investment partners, they're going to need a return. Can you get that? Can you get it for yourself, right? Most of us don't want to just buy a job. They want to buy to create value. Is it there for you? And then if things don't happen as I expect, and I guarantee you there is a 100% chance that what you expect will not happen exactly as you lay it out, okay? When that comes to be true, what's the likely outcome, okay? So diligence, to me, this is too simple a set, and you gotta go through months and months of work, but these are the 2 questions you're trying to answer. Start with the exit in mind, and so to me, houses are an easy analogy for me. You might be kicking the tires at the top opportunity. Well, what you're really buying is the opportunity to create the thing on the bottom. right? And so don't evaluate the top as it relates to creating the bottom picture, okay? And that's gotta be an evolution. That's the value you're gonna create. You're gonna pay a fair price for the thing on top, but what you're trying to create is the thing on the bottom. And then, unless you're buying a company to hold it forever, you're gonna have an exit. I encourage you to think, before you even buy your company, about the group you're gonna sell it to, and think about them as a customer, right? We're all good, if we're operators, at thinking hard about what our customers like and don't like, what they want, what they'll spend money on, what's the next thing I can do for them. Think about the buyer for your company, even if it's 5 or 10 years from now, as a customer. What can you really make attractive for them? Because guess what happens? You've changed from a buyer to a seller at that point. You are trying to get more people to show up at the table, right? Carolyn wants to bring you 15 bids, not just one. You control that today, okay? You've got to keep it simple. If you can't articulate the 1, 2, or 3 things that you're going to do to add value in this company, it's probably too complicated. And I would even tell you that most of you are going to be out fundraising. You're going to have to explain your strategy to them. And if you say, well, I've got to do these 56 things, but then it's going to be awesome, you may not get funded, right? I believe that, so full disclosure, the company that I have under contract now is my first experience with an SBA loan. I hear lots of people say, oh, just go get an SBA loan. That's not just like the cafeteria where you can go help yourself. They'll tell you no, right? And so be ready to have a simple, believable strategy. If it's too complicated, you may walk away. And having the discipline to walk away, that's the most important thing you can do right now, okay? All right, A World of Tile. This was the first one that I did, how I found it. So I told you already, I had 11 stores, 95% of revenue and profits were in Colorado. It was represented by a local broker, super guy. I went to high school with his son. The broker's name is Jim. Jim's sphere of visibility was Denver, okay? And he didn't think that this company would be attractive for investors outside of Denver. The sellers had what I call a magic number valuation. They wanted X for their business, and they said to me, Sean, you can multiply whatever you want times whatever you want as long as it hits our number, right? And you'll, I believe, hear that a lot. Like, you guys are smart, you have a pedigree, you can have an MBA maybe, and get your fancy stuff out of here. This is my number, this is what I want, okay? They had that, and I made them an offer that was about 70% of their magic number. They didn't like it. I couldn't agree more, Carolyn, with what you said about having a rapport with people, because a lot of people would be insulted by a 70% offer. I said, hey, this is the best I can do. I'm sorry if it doesn't meet your number, but this is what I can come up with. And if you don't mind, if you don't like this offer, I think they turned it down, and then I said, okay, if you don't mind, I'll stay in touch. I'll just, every 3-6 months, I'll reach out, see how you're doing, and because I love the company. And their earnings rose over 2 years, but their magic number didn't change. And so now I got to multiply what I wanted times what I wanted and make the number work, right? At the same time, they were so tired of this thing, their magic number got a 10% discount, okay? So that was cool. How I funded it, this is about a little bit more about the 5 cups of coffee thing. There's a group that had just started here in Denver. I think it's a national organization. I kind of lost touch, but Association for Corporate Growth, ACG. I got on the board of this thing. It's like a business development group, super people that were involved. And they said, hey, we're going to have a growth conference. And it's going to be at I think it's the Ritchie Center. What's the building here with the big gold thing on top? Is that the Ritchie Center? So we were there. Beautiful thing. And I raised my hand and I said, this is the coolest event. I want to be in charge of bringing private equity people to Denver. At the time, this is 2001, there weren't very many private equity groups here. So I'm going to call them. I'm going to make a personal invite and try and get these guys with money to come and think that Denver is a place they should look. And so I had this sheet next to me that was my A World of Tile list, and I would call the main partner in the firm, hey, we're having this really cool party in Denver. It's going to be great networking. You'll find all kinds of opportunities that are good for you. What kind of companies do you buy? Well, I buy healthcare companies. I buy distributors. I buy this. Awesome. Well, we're going to have various people in the room that'll meet your needs. You should come. If they say, we buy retailers of, little companies and we want to grow them, then I said, well, hey, can I find you at the cocktail hour? Because I've got this little company I want to tell you about. There's one of the people that I invited came. They are called the River Associates. They're out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I gave him one pager. I also handed him a cocktail at the same time. And 2 weeks later, they flew me to Chattanooga and said, okay, well, we want to pursue this deal. It was amazing because they were great investors. And they also had a playbook. Okay, they had lenders. They had know-how, and so it wasn't all me. Someone, I think maybe it was, I love your presentation, Carolyn. I want to steal your slides. Don't do it all. These guys handed me a lot of information. I'm going to tell you about getting creative on how to fund things. Jim couldn't get his deal done, and I didn't have any money, and River Associates needed me. They said, you're going to put in 1.5% of the purchase price. I said, okay, no problem. But it was a big problem because I didn't have 1.5%. So I called Jim and I said, hey, Jim, I'm about to get your deal done for you. And you're going to get basically a 4.5% fee. I want 1.5% or a third of your fee because I got you paid. No problem. There was my equity. Okay, so getting creative on how you fund things is definite advantage to you. The sellers were motivated. They rolled 25% of their equity. They carried a $2 million note, and they had a 2-year management contract because River Associates said, we think we like Sean, but we're not sure we like Sean. And so we want to be able to mitigate that risk with the people who started the business. I already told you this, the cocktail napkin. We need 2 other markets. We need to double EBITDA, and you got 5 years to do it. Awesome. Heads down, we did it all, 24 months, we sold it less than 2.5 years later. I mean, I'll tell you the numbers. We bought it for $9 million, we sold it for $27. So it was great. I rolled, well, I already told you that story, so I won't go into it. Funding your acquisition. There's 2 kinds of money you're gonna get. You're gonna need equity and debt. I'm gonna talk about both of them. Here, number 1, it's you, and it could be that you say, I got a little nest egg from whatever. Maybe I did well in the last company, or I have an inheritance or something. You're always the first source of equity, and maybe you can do it all your own. If you're gonna use an SBA, it's 10% for the company's size we're talking about, maybe you have that. That's awesome, because there's nothing better than being your own boss and not having to listen to anybody offer their opinion. Okay? The seller is a source of equity. I'm going to tell you that this is a double-edged sword. They can defer some risk or fill some of the gaps, but they have all the relationships. They know how to do things. They have their opinions. And if they're financially invested, they can influence it. And so you got to make sure that you want that money. Okay? Friends and family is another one. Private equity partners, they're all I've done, okay? And so you should hear that. Listen to me with a grain of salt. I think they offer lots of amazing opportunities, capital, know-how, accountability, impetus to scale. It's not for everybody, okay? And not all companies that you may be interested are going to be interesting for them. Another, by the way, strategy exit is make your company interesting for them. If you start one little franchise and then you get to 10, one of those may be an amazing partner for you to sell to. ETA focused, see the North Spring Partners. I had a conversation with them once. They fund searchers to go out and look for businesses. It's not a personal endorsement of North Spring. It's go look at their website to learn about a source of capital for you, okay? Family offices, just a different kind of, they're families, wealthy families that invest. A lot of them open the doors to people like you. And I wrote this, there's a picture of Dallas there. There's a law firm that's called McGuire Woods that has a huge practice doing the M&A for typically larger businesses than the $2 million size, the ones where you need an equity partner. They have this growth conference every year in Dallas. It's an open house, networking. You should go. And I think you should go to meet people, but also to learn, okay? I will tell you that if it's anyone, the equity is anyone but you, there is going to be an exit. They will need their money back, plus a return. And so if you're bringing in a partner, understand what they need, what they want, how they're going to get their money back. Private equity, it's one of the things that I didn't like about it as a partner. They got to sell when they wanted. I didn't have that vote, okay? So know if you're searching for a specific type of equity, what comes with the whole picture, okay? And then the creative option, for this one, as I mentioned, the creative example I used was, hey, broker, fund my equity. Creative options are listed like that for a reason. Come up with one that could work for you, okay? Sources of debt, seller financing, I talked about that one. If you're gonna pay the seller over time, it's awesome. There's no fees, and it's also not awesome because they're in your underwear, and this used to be theirs, okay? And so, double-edged sword, friends and family. Hey, I'm gonna do this SBA loan. I need $250,000, Dad. Great, pay me back. It's perfect. The banks, SBA and conventional loans, what I will tell you is pay big attention to personal guarantees because they're real, okay? Don't just sign it. It's kind of like when you sign the rental car agreement and you turn down insurance. If you get the car dinged, you gotta pay for it, okay? Or your insurance will, it's a pain in the butt. So bad things can happen. And when you sign a guarantee with a bank, they can take your house. They can take your savings, okay? And I will tell you, I will not sign a conventional loan guarantee. But what I learned in my own diligence on the SBA is it's kind of like your mortgage. You have to qualify. They're going to check your employment, the fact that you can pay. But now you own the home, as long as you're making payments, you can stay in the house. That's the way the SBA works. That guarantee works too. And so for my own, I got comfortable on the pet services business thinking, okay, well, my debt service obligation is on this one's probably going to be $150,000 a year, let's say. I can do that for a year to figure out my own options. But if the bank, if it were a conventional loan and they say, no, we want several $1 million, I don't want you to take that, right? That's a lot for me to put at risk. There's a whole nother class of lenders out there. There are a lot of them are family offices or non-bank lenders. They come with a lot more flexibility. So if it's FDIC insured, it's regulated, there are very specific rules on what those, I have 5 minutes left? Holy moly, I gotta speed up. There's two of them up here listed. They're here in Colorado, Star Mesa Capital and La Plata Capital. They are expensive, but they're flexible. You're talking to the family who is lending you the money. And then as Neil pointed out, this woman, I've never met her. Her name is Ashley Kornblatt. She wanted to buy a company. She went to Dartmouth Business School, a couple years before me, and so her story was the talk of all of our class. She went out to Moab and bought a biking company, an adventure company, and she said, hey, customers, I will sell you in advance 5 trips for $25,000 or something. I'm making up the numbers, but anyway, she effectively pre-sold tours to buy the company. She still got it. You can look her up. I did to create these slides. She's amazing. She's a big person in Utah politics now. So that's a super creative option. Growing your company, start with the exit in mind. You didn't just, as I said, buy the dilapidated house. You took the first step in building this beautiful house. If you look at Series A venture investors, they'll say, hey, work starts when you got the money. It didn't finish. So there's the acknowledgement is, I've just been looking for my business for a couple years, finally got one, done, I've arrived. You just started that day, okay? And go into it, sort of run through the starting line with the expectation that in 5 years, for me, it's 5 years is the time frame I like, you'll have this beautiful thing, but if that's gonna be true in 5 years, then what has to be true in 3 years? What has to be true in 1 year, 90 days, and project plan it, okay? Project plan the capital you'll need. Project plan the people you'll need, okay? Moral of the story is you're building that beautiful house, and don't let time pass. Don't let moss grow under your feet. You got to get on it, okay? Engagement is such a huge deal. These are 2 graphs, one by Gallup on employee engagement and one by a company here in town, GH Smart, that does all things employees. Your most engaged customers and your most engaged employees make all the difference in the world for you. When you buy a company, everyone reevaluates everything, okay? I'm the A player in this company. I'm the rainmaker. Why should I work for you? I may want to, but I'm assessing you that way. Customers, same thing. Are you still going to be able to deliver on my expectations? Your most engaged ones are the ones that you can get so much out of, figure out who they are, don't lose them, and truth is, try and get more engagement from customers and employees. I think maybe it was Neil that said there's 14% bump after an acquisition. That's from people successfully navigating this, right? All right, is this for you? This is how I think of it. This is not out of any academic textbook. It's, I believe pretty strongly that most of us, our risk tolerance goes down over time. When I started, I wasn't married, I didn't have kids. The whole ramen thing was fine with me. But I wasn't qualified. I needed to go out and learn some things. I acquired the skills, and so there's an intersection of these 2 things. I think for most people where this is in your blood, it's earlier than you think. That's my bias. You can go ask your mom if she agrees, right? There's got to be some element of balance to this, but getting into it earlier allows you a lot of, your skills are better than you think. If you can make good decisions and make people like you, you're probably okay. Other considerations, the other people in your life. My wife has sweated my career a lot, right? I've caused her, sadly, a few years of her life off the end, particularly in that World of Tile thing. So take them into account, okay? The energy level and your budget to allow an extended search. I hear people say, oh, I'm going to do one more thing and then I'll get there. Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't, right? What's your energy level today? If it meets it, then get after it. If not, you can still think about it. As doors never close, but is your energy level going to go up in 5 years? Who knows? And then your happiness. For me, little nod to the Bob Dylan movie that's out and Joan Baez. I love this quote, like, you don't get to pick how or when you die, but you do get to pick how you live. This is the only career that I could have. And so knowing that, I got to go make it work. Try and be smart about it and figure it out, okay? Two more slides. A few pearls of wisdom. Number 1, don't overpay. I talked about that. Number 2, you will hit a speed bump. Don't freak out. And if you have to, if things get really bad, like they did for me when inkjet technology was put into tile glazing machines, be a buyer again, right? When the housing, I was with the housing crisis too. Yeah, we can weather this. It's, people are going to want to remodel their houses again at some point, and I want to be there. So 2 different looks, but looking at them like a buyer helped me make opposite decisions there. Work on your credibility. You don't have any. And I hate to tell you, but if you haven't done it, you don't have any. No big deal. You haven't gone to college before you went to college and you got in, right? So you can figure it out, but acknowledge that your credibility gap exists. I lost a business with Tuckerman Capital backing me, and I knew for a fact I was the higher bidder, and that was my biggest lesson in credibility, because the broker representing the company didn't think I could get the deal done, okay? Demonstrate your ability to execute. You don't have to have run a company to prove that you can, okay? Go figure out, think about how you can show people you can execute. That seller that says, I don't want to let my employees down, if they're handing the reins to you, then, and you can't execute, man, I just put these employees in a terrible position, right? So avoid doing it all. We've talked about that. Especially, I would want partners that are the skeptics, okay? Tell me where my blind spots are. Tell me what I'm overlooking. Tell me if I'm too optimistic. Because I want to embrace what you're saying to allow me to go figure it out, right? Maybe you're right. Oh, crap, I don't want to buy a company and just because I can and then have you be right and I screw up, right? And then the founder of A World of Tile did me the biggest favor. I had that list that Carolyn talked about of 156 things that we were going to do to make the company better. And I already told you they came in and had a 2-year management contract, so I was reporting to them. And his name was Larry, and I said, Larry, congratulations, you just got your money wired in last night. Here's my 120 ideas. And he listened to one of them, and he said, Sean, do me a favor. Put your list away. Come back in 90 days, and we'll see if they have value. And there were still things on the list, but it was like 20 things, not 120. So that's one of the biggest favors that he did for me. And then lastly, I was at a speech by Phil Anschutz. He's a gajillionaire. He started out just like the rest of us looking for a company to buy. And the thing that resonated with me, he spoke for 90 minutes, start. Just get in it, right? If you're going to do it, how do I do it? Just go talk to people. How do I do it? Well, look at Biz Buy Sell. How do I do it? Well, go meet with an SBA lender, right? Get out there. So anyway, how did I do on time? Did I use it all? All right. I'm ready for questions.
So please raise your hand if you have any questions. We have a mic on this side and a mic on the other side.
Yeah.
First of all, go Pards, fellow Lafayette grad here
There
in
you
Denver.
go. Come on.
Not many of us. My question is, you talked about your thesis around kind of venture-backed companies that didn't make their growth and financing them, and you showed the P&L for one of them. What's your capital structure for that, right? Because obviously something like that's not going to, generally, if they've been losing money, you may have a path to profitability, but that's probably not going to be like an SBA, a deal that you can do with SBA lending. So can you talk a little bit how you're thinking about those?
Yeah, and so this is why I think this is such a great example to stretch people's mind. I'm not advocating that you go buy turnarounds. This one, that doesn't apply, okay? And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, another layer of validating my investment criteria was learning that there are venture lenders. It's a huge advantage in this strategy because at the time our lender was Silicon Valley Bank. They were a depository institution, FDIC insured. This was way before they are the story we think of. And so they were out of rope. And so we bought the loan for, I can't give specifics, but let's say 15 to 25% of the value of the loan. We foreclosed on the business. We owned the whole thing. Now it just needed cash. And so we had the working capital thing to figure out. And so we didn't have to go finance, get a lender. My watch was to rationalize. This was with a private equity partner, by the way, who's in this arena. And by the way, another wrinkle to the story, I thought the founder was going to stick with me, and I was just going to be like a operating partner, private equity investor. And the day before we closed, the founder called, the CEO said, I can't do this, can you? I don't have gas in the tank for that. So I found myself as CEO. And so my watch was to generate new sales and to rationalize expenses. And so wasn't really a debt appropriate investment. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I was just curious. If you could maybe talk a bit more about personal guarantees. I feel like I hear and read a lot about don't sign them if you can get around it. But then, of course, whenever we talk to a lender, they say it's basically a requirement. And I was just curious, like, if there's any middle ground or maybe some details on how you sorted through that and found a greater solution.
Yeah. So if you go to U.S. Bank or First Bank or Chase, that's going to be their rule. And having gone through their credit training program, they want 3 sources of repayment. Number 1 is cash flow of the business. Number 2 is collateral of the business. And number 3 is your outside capital. So maybe that lender isn't right for you. So when I met with Star Mesa Capital, was considering a deal with them, I said, look, I'm not signing a personal guarantee. And they said, okay, no problem. Just 2 more points of interest or 3 more. That will take some equity in the business. And so first figure out if you're comfortable with it, okay? If you're comfortable with it, then it's going to be the cheapest option, right? The SBA rates these days are 7.5%, maybe something like that. With Star Mesa, you're going to pay in all in 15. But to me, that was a better idea than putting my house at risk.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey there, Rodrigo Fuentes. Loved your presentation style. Thank you for coming. There's so much that's transforming in the world of business as a result of generative AI and just AI in general. And so there are some opportunities where you think, oh, we can apply this really new technology to increase the operational efficiency of a business. And yet at the same time, you might be entering a business, especially if it's knowledge work, where AI might put you out of business in 5 to 10 years or less. And so as you think about the opportunities that you have looked at and that you will continue to look at, how do you think about that risk and opportunity at the same time?
Yeah, so I love it. It's a great question. I'm not smart enough to understand AI today, let alone predict what it's going to do. And so for me, pet services aren't going away, okay? And people actually, as Neil pointed out, are investing more in their pet's quality of life. So I hope to have eliminated that. I will also tell you that people look at me and say, man, you're a risk-tolerant person, like you gravitate to risk. I don't see it that way. I want to be like, if I have to make a bet, buy a company, and then hope that AI can help me add value, to me, that's too risky. Okay, and so I'm not so afraid of the world that AI is going to replace people everywhere and make everything obsolete. I think it's going to be a tool that'll help us. If you're relying on it, something new to happen, it's more of a venture bet than a buy a company bet, I think.
I was wondering if you could speak to, when you're putting a deal together, how you approach working capital.
Yeah, whoever said deals under $3 million don't typically have it. That's certainly my experience. I'm starting with 0 cash in the bank in my new business. If it happens, it's hung up, so I can tell you, diligence is a pain in the butt, but don't lower your guard on that. Part of my purchase price is cash to operate the business. There's super simple formulas when you get bigger and working capital is in the business, and it's just how much inventory do I need to generate sales? And you can go back and look at sales and say, this is the inventory we sold for the last year. It's formulaic. Okay, I need 100%. You've got 90% of what I need, or you got 110%, but I need 100. And if it's 90%, you get a purchase price reduction. If it's 110, seller, you get that. And so it's a lot less complicated, I think, than it needs to be. It's just a super smart point to think about it, because if you don't, the seller's going to use it to their advantage and take the cash out or something. And so it's not hard, just put it on your list.
Great presentation. Thanks for this. Very helpful and practical. One of the things that you hear as a searcher often is differentiate yourself. How, when you're looking kind of for businesses across multiple industries or any industry like you mentioned, that's one of the main ways that helps differentiate you, I think. How have you done that in the past when you're approaching brokers and even other networking?
I love the question, and I want to make them like me and trust me. And that's such a simple answer, but it matters so much, right? And I'm going to make them like me and trust me, like look them in the eye and all the things that Carolyn was saying. But also, I'm going to ask smart questions, right? And I'm going to talk about the opportunity for their employees to prosper under me, okay? And if I'm going to lose a deal, I'm going to lose a deal. And I've lost way more than I've ever bought, right? I'm just going to be me, stay grounded. I tend to be pretty extroverted. And so I'm curious about people. I want them to win. If you go in and just do that, I think you're doing well. And I haven't been in very many auctions. And so if I offered $100 and someone else offered $100, then I hope they pick me and like me more. But I haven't had experiences where it comes down to that. And probably, I guess, thinking out loud, my bias is that I don't tend to buy companies where there's a big competition.
Even like networking or talking to brokers, the first thing they ask, friends and family, even like what type of business, it's like, well, I'm looking for a business that makes money, right?
Yeah, it's really hard, especially I've hurt myself with that because I haven't had an industry. There's someone that I was talking to in the last 6 months, ETAer, and they want the private aircraft industry, servicing or who knows what. Oh, you just helped me a ton understand what you're looking for. I want companies that I can buy right. Sorry, I don't know what that means. And so it's refining your messaging. With the VC cast-off thing, it was far easier for me to do because I knew I'd been CEO of a company that had been twice in a portfolio where the investors didn't want me anymore. I know what their motivation is, and I'm going to play on that, which is I don't want to spend time on this stupid thing anymore, right? So did I answer your question? Cool.
Hey, back here. So on the topic of seller-side financing and in regards to lenders, have you ever worked with many lenders who see seller-side financing as a loan serviceable event? Does SBA do this, or how often do you see this happen, and is it kind of advisable?
It's a great question. So if you have a lending institution or a sophisticated lender, they're going to need first priority, okay? So that makes necessarily the seller like a second mortgage, okay? And what the lender will say is, as long as everything's going well, you can service the seller's note too. But if things aren't going well, then we have the right to turn them off. The seller's going to have to get comfortable with that in order to agree to it, first off. But then if things do go badly and you have a rough year or something, the bank is going to call the seller and say, hey, you're invested, help me run this, and you can get marginalized. And so I'm not saying turn away from it. I'm saying that they have all the relationships that you want, but you don't have, the seller. And so they're in a pretty powerful position, even if they're in the second position. And you're going to have to get them comfortable why they should be subordinated to the bank if that's part of your proposal.
Mm-hmm. But in the negotiation process, couldn't you leverage their interest or let's say their confidence in their company's ability to generate revenue as a piece for negotiation? Or assuming that they have the appetite, right, to stay on and help advise you. Yeah, how do you navigate creative seller-side financing in that sense?
I think that's a tough pitch. It's going to work if you're the only person at the table, or they'll listen if you're the only person at the table. But if you're competing against someone, this guy's out, right? He's putting too much of my capital at risk. Oftentimes, people can do what's called an earn-out, so it's not alone. It's, hey, if we do well, then you get a share of the upside. I'm very confident that sellers have a minimum cash need that they have today. So there's all kinds of tools, and if you can come to an agreement with them, then it's the right deal, right? It's like I said, finding the partner you want to be married to the rest of your life is going to look very different than my path for that. But your path is awesome too.
Okay, and then on the lender side, is there like a percentage that often would service debt on seller-side financing? I guess I know that from a risk point, right, some underwriters, bankers don't want to, use seller-side financing as like a debt serviceable event. So is there like a general percentage that you've seen?
It's going to depend on the cash flow of the business. And in Carolyn's slide, she put up, get comfortable with your debt service coverage ratio. It's pretty formulaic. And debt service coverage is all debt, right? So seller financing as well as what you owe to the bank.
Cool.
I had a question back here. So first off, I want to say thank you for the presentation. It was very informational. My question is regarding the credibility gap that you mentioned that a lot of first-time ETAs face. As a young entrepreneur, what are some skill sets that we can develop now to overcome this challenge?
It's a great question, and get experience, right? My experience at Health Fitness was amazing. Look, I didn't own the company, but I turned it around, and so that went a long way to help. Okay, now that you own it, you've done it, and you own it, so you're more committed to getting it right. Helped me. There's any number of millions of ways to show credibility, and what I would do is look at the business you're looking to buy and say what has to happen, and this is what I've done that helps you think that I can do it. I would also say be super deferential to the people that are there, the seller, but also the employees, and say, I want to learn from them, right? If you come in and say, I'm the boss of you, people will know not only that they don't want to work for you, but you probably aren't going to get it done because that doesn't make people excited.
Thank you.
You mentioned the outcome for one of the businesses that you ran, and curious what happened with Worklet. Is that still a work in progress?
Still going, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm still on the board. We still own it. If you'd like to buy it, then we'll listen to any and all offers. The truth is, I'm on the board, but it's private equity owned. I had the opportunity to stay when we did the merger with StrongArm. For a variety of reasons, I opted to not take the CEO position, and so the CEO of StrongArm took it. We've since moved on from him as well, but still going.
And that merger with StrongArm was essentially a liquidity event?
No, they were a VC cast-off also. So I still am shocked when venture capitalists say we no longer believe that we're going to make our money here. They just walk away. And so there's so many opportunities. I've heard in ETA, people talk about the silver tsunami. This is another one that's just as big. Very different profile, but.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the talk. This was really informative. I was wondering, what advice would you give to somebody thinking about taking on a turnaround?
Have you done anything like that before?
I have a background in like operations strategy, Lean Six Sigma, and I've done startups before.
Yeah, so several things. Number one is really test. Like, why is this business broken? and you better be super convinced. Price it in. So even as bad as things can get, make it 20% worse and say, yes, this is still a viable opportunity, and then get patient capital. Okay, so if you're whatever money you put together doesn't like this type of wild, wild west environment, then they can stop you, right? And go talk to customers, talk to employees. Diligence is super important. And know, like the group that I bought A World of Tile from, with, they say they buy good companies with bad balance sheets. And so if someone else in the previous round put too much debt on the company, that's easy. So I'm going to go talk to customers. Oh, they still love me. Employees still want to work here. And if I buy the company and make the debt go away, that's my kind of turnaround. But if I don't know if the product works anymore and there's substitutes and we're losing our good employees, so figure out why. And then structure the deal to allow yourself wiggle room.
Thank you.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? Okay.
Cool. So when you're working with investors, what are some things you can do to really stand out that maybe other people aren't doing, to just be someone that they're really excited to work with? And what are some things that you should avoid that could burn bridges?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I will tell you, now I'm more convinced than ever, if you've got a good deal, you'll find money for it. So really focus on bringing the good deal. And a lot of people with money will say, okay, great, go find a company and bring it to me, and I'm interested if you have a deal. I'm never going to fall in love with you and say, oh, I'm backing you. Bring me a deal, and we'll look at it together. So number one is have a compelling deal. And number two is, if I'm doing business, I want people to win. And I don't care if that's a customer of mine. I don't care if that's an investor. Like, if they want a 25% IRR, then I'm going to fight like crazy to get it for them. Why? Because I want them to fight like crazy for my win. Or also, as the sort of the guy in the corner office, I'm going to need either a favor or forgiveness at some point, and I want them to listen to me. Does that make sense? And so just fight for their win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last one.
Hi. So I just learned about ETA like a few weeks ago, and it seems that the EBITDAs is the main KPI that you look at when filtering out businesses, right? So if you're talking with someone and they don't even know their EBITDAs, would you automatically just say, like, that's not a good business?
I'm sorry, I don't know what EBITDAs is.
Or the...
Oh, EBITDA. Okay.
EBITDA, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
Likely. That's likely going to be true. Sometimes it's called seller's discretionary cash flow. Sometimes it's called, net earnings, something like that. It's pretty common that, and there's multiples of that, so it's well established. But if you're buying turnarounds, it could be an amazing opportunity, and there is no cash flow, right? And so, I'm sorry, I gave you a very fuzzy answer, but yeah. So yes, EBITDA is critical, cash flow is critical, but in valuation, let me say it this way. If you're going out to buy profitable businesses, and that's the sort of the golf course you want to play in, then it'll take care of itself. Yeah, EBITDA is everything.
That's everything. Okay. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more?
Could you speak just for a moment about your transaction you did with World Tile of the seller stayed on under a management contract? Was that kind of a net asset to you, or was that a liability?
It was awesome. It was great, and in part because I had a great relationship with them. Or it didn't start out this way. In fact, they thought they were going to spit me out, but I was necessary to them getting paid. But ultimately, Larry spoke at my wedding. So it is a to-do list for me to make them like me, okay? And until they're out of it, I want to listen to them, incorporate what they have to say, they were there because I didn't have the credibility, right? And so if I had gone toe-to-toe with them, we were right, Sean couldn't do this. Or, well, they never actually bet against me. I think they did believe that I could do it, but the sellers were their fallback. And so we got along great. I added value. They saw what I could do. No one was going to outwork me because I'd just spent 3 years trying to find this stupid thing. And now it's just work. And they were impressed with what I did.
Let's give Sean a big round of applause. Thank you. That was awesome. We're going to take a 15-minute break and come back for our final speaker of the day. Okay, this is our final speaker of the day, and the format's just a little bit different. Before I introduce our speaker, we're going to do Q&A, but we're going to do it a little bit different. You can hit that QR code, and I'll come back to this in a second. And throughout the presentation, Neil, who will be sitting over there, will be feeding us questions in from the audience as well. So our goal for this final one is to make it very interactive. So to get started, please give a warm round of applause for Sara Schaeffner, CEO and principal of the Digital Frontier, serial ETAer, pretty awesome human being. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. But I'm going to start this off really, really easy. And just, Sarah's going to set the table a little bit like Sean did about who she is, what she's been doing, and why she ended up sitting next to me on this stage.
Thank you.
Just push that out. Sorry about that.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Carolyn, thank you for recommending me. It's great to be here. This is my very favorite topic, ETA. A little bit of background on me. I have, and we're going to get into this obviously, I've purchased and am currently running 2 companies. My experience is going to be the counterpoint to Sean's. Very different experience. I loved hearing him. Clearly, there are different paths to ETA. I did not start out as entrepreneurially curious. I had jobs my whole life, my whole first life, and worked for other companies. And in my mind, success was being promoted, making more money, being recognized in a company, moving up to the top. And that's what I was pursuing. I ended up CEO of 2 separate companies prior to my ETA journey. Those were both very interesting and very different experiences. My ETA journey started about 6 years ago. I had moved to Colorado 7 years ago. I was CEO of a company in the mining and minerals industry, and I was asked to move to Denver to facilitate the sale of that company. So I was delighted to move to Denver. I brought my family, I brought my mom. I have 2 children, 2 teenage boys now. And so we came here, but I told them I'm probably going to be out of a job once I'm successful in repping this sale. So I'll look for something new, but prepare yourself, we may end up having to relocate again because Denver's a pretty small city. So we came, things unfolded. I did indeed find myself in the job market, but we had fallen in love with Colorado. Didn't take very long. So we were all absolutely elated and we had found our place. And so I hit the streets in Denver looking for another C-level or senior level role. Well, there aren't a lot of those out there, as some of you may be painfully aware. And so I'm not actually particularly proud of this, but in a way, my ETA journey was buying myself a job. We didn't want to leave. My boys had settled in, and I was networking, looking for an opportunity. I, too, am a generalist. I've worked across industries, and I actually think that being a generalist, ETA is a fantastic path. Because you have all of these transferable skills, and you know about marketing, and you know about sales, and you know about accounting, and you know about different industries, and you bring all that to the table. it's not so good when you're trying to find an executive position in a company, right? Because if you don't have 25 years of one field, you're not an expert in it. And if you don't have 25 years in one industry, you're not an expert in it. So you're probably not going to get that role at, Ball Aerospace or whatever, which is a job I really wanted, but I didn't get. So I was networking, looking for my next opportunity. And in that, I went and, like Sean said, coffee, wine, events. And I found myself at this small business in Boulder, and it was a kind of an HR services firm. And so this woman had taken time to meet with me, and she said, very candidly, well, how much money do you need to make? Or how much money do you want to make? And I told her, and she was like, you're not going to get that in Colorado. And I was like, well, I was CEO of a Colorado company, and that's what I was making. And she said, well, that was an anomaly. You're not going to make that. Why don't you buy a business? And I was like, what? And I don't know what I thought people did with their companies when they were done running them, but it had never even crossed my mind to buy an existing business. So I became completely captivated with this idea, and I continued my networking, and I went to a session, something like this, that was put on, I think, by a Chamber of Commerce or something in Boulder, and oh my gosh, my curiosity was so piqued. So I continued my networking, and I would say, oh, what do you do? Oh, well, I'm looking for my next opportunity as a C-level or a senior level executive, et cetera. And then I would say, but I'm also thinking about buying a business and running it. And I found, after doing that a few times, that when I was giving the CEO looking for a job spiel, I felt like hollow and fake, and like I was really not, this was really not gonna be successful. But then when I would start talking about buying a business, I got excited and really engaged, and I thought, oh my gosh, who knew? Like, this is what I was supposed to do. So I stopped talking about getting a job, and I purely put my energy into looking for a company to buy. So that was 2019 that I started looking. And I ended up buying my first company, which is the Digital Frontier, in September 2020. I did have another business under LOI prior to that, but thank goodness it fell through. It was in the bridal gown industry, and as you might recall, there was this thing, COVID, in 2020, where weddings stopped happening. So thank goodness that one didn't pan out for me. But I bought the Digital Frontier, which is a commercial printing company. It was based in Arvada. And then 2 years later, I bought Photocraft, which is another printing
I'm going to put a hold there for a second because
Okay,
we're going to
sorry.
get through all my questions.
Fine.
Well, no, because I want to understand the search process. You were talking about bridal gowns, and then you bought digital print. There's a little bit of a difference between those two businesses.
Yes.
So when you were preparing yourself for the search, what were you looking for in terms of the type of business, the industry? And then I would like you to talk a little bit about the search process.
Yes. So, like Sean, I was completely industry agnostic. My experience was in mining and minerals and technology and financial research and a number of other things, healthcare tech. I didn't really care what the industry was. I was much more about, and I'll use the term fundamentals, about the fundamentals of the company and would it meet my needs. And so how I went about the search was networking, asking, talking, looking on Biz Buy Sell, and talking with brokers. And Carolyn, I thought your point about not being able to follow up with everybody who says, hey, keep me in mind, was a really good one, because that's what I was doing. Hi, I'm looking for this kind of company. Would you please call me when you find one? Yeah, that's how we met. And in the end, as has also been pointed out, I found the Digital Frontier because my lawyer that I had engaged for the bridal gown company heard about it from a broker. And my lawyer let me know. And that's how that got started. But for me, the industry didn't really matter. Again, I confessed to this room full of my new best friends that I did indeed buy a by my job. And that didn't feel very good, to be really honest. But I will say, I'll skip to the end and say it's the best thing I ever did. It has been fulfilling and thrilling and terrible and everything in between, but it was an excellent decision. My criteria, I'm a very pragmatic person. And someone put up there on the slide happiness, right? And so the decision to stay here in this geography and make that choice for my family was key. And so I thought, okay, first and foremost, I need a job that'll pay the bills. I need a job. I need to find a company that makes enough money to support my family, to pay the SBA loan, because I don't have any PE or VC funding. So mine is self-funded. I have a seller loan, and I have an SBA loan. Actually, I have two. So it's got to pay the bank, and it's got to have enough money left over every month to invest back in the business or absorb shocks. Very simple on the financial front. There needs to be a team in place with expertise, because I'm a generalist and I'm probably not going to bring it. I'm going to bring a lot of other things, but I'm not going to bring the industry knowledge. And so there needs to be depth of knowledge in the company. And a relationship with the seller. Again, I've been surprised to hear how much that was emphasized today, because I personally did not fully appreciate how important that is. I am a highly risk-tolerant person, and I am highly independent. And so in my head, I was going to buy a business, and the seller was going to go away, and I was going to do it my way. And I was going to be very nice about it, and I was going to treat people well. But at the end of the day, the seller wasn't really going to be a factor very long term. That is not true. First of all, if you do get seller financing, they do, stay engaged to some extent. Now, in my case, my seller stayed on for the first year. I asked him to work for me, and he agreed. And he was amazing. So I just got lucky. He was amazing to work with. He was phenomenally helpful. But what I realized after the fact is you are buying a culture. And if you don't like or trust the seller, you're buying a company that person established and poured themselves into. And so having a good relationship with the seller, liking them, respecting them is critically important, because they are part of the company that you're buying, regardless of whether you're ever going to see them again. So relationship with the seller, depth of knowledge, can support my family were the three largest. Obviously, there was also, customer concentration. Is this a recession-proof or, an inflation-proof industry? The normal sort of business considerations, but again, my approach was highly practical. I looked at excavation companies, I looked at porta-potty companies, I looked at everything in between, wedding gowns. That was by far the most girly. In fact, it was way too girly for me. But it was really more about what's the business? Is it stable? Is it good? Can it support my family? And can I make it better?
So Carolyn had an interesting point that on the sell side, the broker's with the seller the entire time of the relationship all the way to the sale, but not really on the buyer's side. So there's some important things you have to do. You have to do the search, which you've talked about. You have to figure out how much money you can actually afford to spend on a business. You have to value the business, and then you have to go in and negotiate, and then close the deal. Was this Sara all by herself, or what resources did you have along that way? And what mistakes did you potentially make?
The first time or the second?
We're still on the first time.
So I was pretty solo, except for the financial due diligence. In that little program you have, which I can print for you next time, by the way, we can print those.
You will.
Okay, that's a deal. In the back, there's some resources, including an HBR book. That book is great. I used that book a lot. And so, in fact, I was glad to see it in there because I forgot to write it down or bring it. So I did a lot of it myself, but I did hire a company to do the financial due diligence because I felt like I was out of my depth in terms of like comparing the tax records with the P&L, et cetera. And I did have a lawyer who represented me in the contract negotiation. But that was it. And as far as the negotiation itself, one other point I wanted to make about the seller, and it's been made earlier, but I think it bears repeating. I think in the case of that purchase, the seller and I both felt like we had done really well. And that's winning at negotiation, right? Both parties need to feel like they've done well. If somebody comes out feeling like they got hosed, that's just not a good foundation.
And can I interrupt? And you wanted that person on for another year. And if he felt like he got hosed, I'm not sure that relationship would have been great. And he really would have worked in the best interest of the business.
Absolutely. And it is personal. Again, I didn't appreciate that fully going in. I do now, very much so, now as an owner, too, an owner-operator. So there wasn't a huge amount of haggling. We came to a fair medium point and moved forward with the contract.
So Neil, you're looking at me like he has some questions, but before we get there, one question to you. Any mistakes in that first purchase or things you reflect on, you're like, I could have maybe done that a little bit better if this was my second, third, or fourth time?
I'm sure that there were a lot of things I could have done better, but I often say that I was very fortunate, again, very fortunate with the seller, and everything went right with that purchase. There were things I underestimated, which I think we're probably going to get to in a subsequent question, so I won't move forward.
Okay. Neil, you have a question from the audience?
Yeah, so there's some great questions coming in. Thank you all for it. And a couple I think, Sarah, you've addressed, like why did you choose to buy a company instead of bootstrapping one, or what was important to you? And so it sounded like, being able to provide for your family was important.
I'm sorry, just to interrupt.
Yeah, of course.
I never had an idea for a startup. And I definitely didn't have the appetite for a startup. And if you go to my LinkedIn page, I have late bloomer. That's like my best description, and it's always been true. So I was 50 when I bought the first company. And so I had I had the mortgage and the kids and all the obligations, right? So, well, thanks, because I'm older now.
So one question, there's three that I'm going to melt together with the most skill I have. It's basically along the lines of, like, what is something or some things that sort of popped up that you never imagined were going to happen, that you couldn't have anticipated, and it was just like, how did I not think about that?
That's the second company.
Or is that the second? If you want to wait for that one, we can wait for that
hold
one. Yeah,
that
that's
thought.
fine. And then...
I will comment, though, this is relevant to that discussion.
Sure.
And this is the only thing I wanted to remember. I got to put my glasses on. I was caught off guard by the volume of, for one thing, paperwork. I was caught off guard by the volume of administrative tasks and how much time they take. And I think I said when we first met, I was innocently arrogant when I was looking to buy a company, thinking, I hear people who own their own business work 80 hours a week, and they're clearly doing something wrong, because how could you possibly need that much time? And then I bought a company, and I found myself working 7 days a week, full time, all the time, because there's just a whole lot to do and think about, and stuff that I hadn't fully thought of, so there's, the first 90 days, right, you're figuring out, you're absorbing information. There's the proverbial fire hose, and it's how does the company work? how does the technology work? Who on the team does what and when? Who are the clients? Who are the vendors? When do you pay them? What are your payment terms? What's your AR? What are people's payment habits? Are you going to be able to make payroll? Who does your invoicing? Is it you? Who does your bookkeeping? Is it you? Because it was me, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit that it sort of still is me. Sales taxes. Good Lord. If you're going to buy a company that sells stuff to people in Colorado, you're going to learn a lot about sales taxes and business taxes and insurance and payroll and all the things. They're so administrative. And, when you're going to buy a small company, you probably don't have an assistant. And you might not for a really long time.
That is awesome, by the way. Thank you for that. That just started making my head swim. Yeah. But, okay, so along those lines, you get the keys to the company the first 90 days. And Sean touched on this a little bit as well. Usually in 2 weeks, you have this thing called payroll, and you have rent, and you have benefits, and you have a number of expenses. So you've paid X for the company. What about the cash you need to cover all of those things? Because I'm guessing most of your clients are saying, you know what, we usually do net 30 or net 45 or net 60. So you're not going to actually see cash flow potentially for a couple months.
100%. So when you're figuring out what you can afford to buy, you need to understand what you need to give to the bank as a down payment. So again, my first purchase, I put a chunk down. I think it was 15% out of my nest egg, and the seller financed 10%, and I got an SBA loan for the balance. But I kept back. I didn't buy a company that was bigger than that because I knew I was probably going to need to have another $100,000 sitting ready to pay the bills until my clients paid their bills. Sean said it earlier, things are absolutely not going to go exactly as you expect. No question about it. Hopefully they won't, go terribly, but you're always going to need more money than you think. And I wish I'd had more cash flow to hire even a part-time assistant who could have done some of those administrative things so that I could have been freed up to focus on the more strategic things. And I still struggle mightily with that, but I'm working on it.
Okay. So you've bought your first business, you're a couple years into it, and then for some reason that you're going to talk to us about, you decide to buy a second business. It's a strategic acquisition maybe. You were bored. You wanted to try something new. What were the reasons? And then please walk us through the experience.
Okay. So I was not looking to buy another business. Again, I started this by saying that I am a very pragmatic person. Someone contacted me. Actually, the business advisor that I had hired to help me with the due diligence contacted me and said, I came across this listing for another printing company, and I thought of you, and that you might want to check it out. And so, this was just out of the blue. And I told you earlier that I am not a risk-averse person. I am a very risk-tolerant person, although I think I might be learning to tamp that down a little bit. So I looked at it, and the one thing I had been thinking of was, how can I diversify my product portfolio? Because as I mentioned, we are a commercial printer. So we do really big stuff and we do really little stuff and everything in between, but all commercial. And so if there is an economic slowdown, like right now, for example, printing slows down a lot. And so I thought, okay, what could I do to diversify a little bit? And then this popped up. So this was a printing company in Boulder. And they also did commercial print, but we did not have duplicate clients. And they also had fine art and fine art photography. And that was something that we didn't have. So there was the diversification that I was looking for. And they did custom framing. So I was like, ooh, now we essentially triple our offerings, if you will. and the price looked so good. It just looked so good. It was too good to be true. And it was too good to be true. And that is a lesson that I have learned. You know, if something looks too good to be true, it probably is. So I went down the path. Now, this was a unique circumstance because very unfortunately, the person was selling because he was terminally ill. And so things were not typical. And Sean pointed out how critical due diligence is. And there was very little due diligence on this deal because he was not available. He was completely checked out, and understandably. And so I sort of made a bet, you know, and I'm good with numbers and spreadsheets. And so I did the spreadsheets, and, you know, they were breaking even, but I found $400,000 that would fall to the bottom line day one. And I thought, well, geez, that sounds pretty good, you know, and the price tag wasn't all that high. And so I'm like, well, this thing will pay for itself in 2 years, and et cetera, et cetera. And as you probably guessed, everything that could go wrong in the second acquisition did. I mean, the closing went through, and I got another SBA loan, and I put another chunk of money down, and that was all fine. But I think proper due diligence would have revealed a lot more than I was aware of. But things that you really couldn't have anticipated, you know, clients going bankrupt who had a tremendous amount of AR. We lost our largest client 3 weeks after the close because of something that had happened 6 months prior, and I begged him to stay, and he had, you know, made his mind up, and off he went. And that was about $500,000 of revenue a year. And we were in Boulder and Arvada, and so I merged the two companies into a centralized location in Broomfield, and the move costs twice what was budgeted and forecast. So it was really a learning experience. Someday, I mean, I think I'm sort of glad that I did it, although it was so painful. And now back to your question about things that can happen that you could never even dream of, and the insurance note earlier. We had a small spate of pieces that were custom framed falling off the walls. The adhesion was failing, and I won't go into it in great depth, but it turns out that our E&O insurance does not cover that. And these were, you know, $10,000 pieces that were falling off the wall and damaging the floors. And so, I mean, when I said everything could go wrong, it did. It really has been challenging, and it's still challenging. So I bit off a lot, and I still think that, you know, for me, ETA was the perfect fit. It's the dream job I never knew I wanted. Like, I just had no idea that it would be so great for me. I am someone, I like control. I like flexibility. I've been told what to do a lot in prior jobs and lives, and I'm ready to not be told what to do. I love advice. I love getting advice, and you can change my mind. You know, if you're an employee and you work for me and you have a good idea and you think I'm doing it wrong, you can change my mind. But at the end of the day, I like to make the decisions. And so ETA has been great, in spite of some incredibly challenging situations. And, you know, I mean, you'll hear the stories. I do have personal guarantees on my SBA loans. I decided that that was something that I could handle, and also that these businesses were not going to fail, and they aren't. But there have been some creative financing, you know, to make payroll. My payroll's $50,000 every 2 weeks, and I hate payroll week because it's a lot. And, you know, I don't have private equity and I don't have any financial backers. And so it's just me coming up with the dough.
What about, so my uncle has owned his own business for a very long time, and when I started, he came up to me at some family gathering, and he's like, how do you feel about those 2 months out of the year when there's 3 payrolls?
Oh, I hate those. Except I get 3 paychecks too, and then I'm like, well, that's kind of good.
At that point in time, I'd rather not get a paycheck, the extra paycheck.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. Things they don't teach you in business school. Neil, other questions?
Yeah, so there's a great one here about what did you do, other than having some advisors and things like that, what did you do to cover your bases in terms of maybe liability or during the negotiations without making the seller feel like they, I mean, there's 2 scenarios, without making the seller feel like they were getting kind of hosed? Because you talked about sort of make it mutually beneficial. So, but how did you know you were going to be protected from things? Are there some elements you put in place to protect that?
Not really. You know, I felt that the price was fair. It wasn't a bargain, but I felt that it was fair based on cash flow and seller's discretionary earnings, which is, you know, what we worked with. I was getting a good rate from the bank, and I trusted the seller. And I went with that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do more. I'm not saying you shouldn't be smarter than me or cagier or whatever, but that's what I did. And on the note of being cagey, going back to the relationship with the seller, I have a friend who recently tried to buy a business, and he, you know, was talking about what the seller was asking and what he thought it was worth, and I counseled him. Go easy. You know, I understand what you think that you might want to offer, but you can alienate a seller very quickly. And, you know, you said you offered 70%, but you did it in a really nice way, and you maintained that rapport, and you were able to go back. And, you know, sure enough, he put some lowball offer out there, and they basically kicked him off the doorstep, you know. It's personal. It's personal. And so, you know, I'm a little embarrassed by that answer because I probably didn't put, you know, enough protections in place. I mean, we had stuff in the contract related to the seller loan that if he didn't uphold his bit, you know, that could be withheld. So I suppose I did that. But in general, it was just a very transparent, friendly transaction.
What red flags for those in the audience that are thinking about buying a business for the first time? And you've kind of touched on a few things, but should they be thinking about, like almost a checklist? And obviously in the second transaction, there was some big red flags, but what should they be thinking about?
Again, I can't emphasize enough having a little bit more money than you think you're going to need, because things are going to happen. You know, we talked about customer concentration, right? That $500,000 of revenue, which was 25% of the company's revenue, was with that one client. Now, I did double the size of my company when I bought the second company, which helped with customer concentration in the first company. So, you know, and there was no reason to believe that, well, so I was told. There was no reason that I was aware of to think that would happen. Insurance, definitely E&O, errors and omissions insurance. If you're providing a product, if something goes wrong with that product, think about all the things that could potentially happen, and are you covered? Understand your insurance. I took again, I'm not making myself sound very smart, but I took over the insurance policies that the prior owner had in place. And because he had been so helpful, and because we had such a good rapport and he was still there and all those things, I made some assumptions that were wrong in terms of the policies that were in place and whether they were adequate. And I'm still trying to remedy that. Not because anything bad happened outside of the one I already told you about, but because now it's harder to get insurance, and I need to get, you know, proper insurance, and it's challenging. So, things taking longer than you think. Also, and I mean, this didn't, it didn't cause a failure, but, I came in with my, Cornell MBA and, corporate job experience, and we were 10 employees, and those things did not translate very well. I was like, oh, we're going to have status meetings, and we're going to have, reviews, and we're going to have, and they were like, what? Yeah, that doesn't happen here. And so I was like, oh, so I got a little reality check on how, the cultures translate or don't. And I think that's a difference where if you're buying a $15 million company and it's PE backed, or a $30 million company or whatever, you're gonna have a little bit more of that crossover, but it didn't exist. And there was a certain amount of skepticism. Of course there was. Like, who's this woman coming in? She's never owned a company. She doesn't know the first thing about print, and she wants us to have status meetings. Like, this is a joke. But they got over it, and they're still there, and it all worked out. But I had to adjust my expectations, I guess.
I'll add one thing. There's going to be a buy-sell agreement, and somebody has to pay to have it created. I would highly recommend you have it created. It's painful because it's expensive, but you are the one that gets to put in what's most important to you in the buy-sell. There'll be negotiations in it, but there's things like mediation and arbitration that you can decide where that happens. And when I sold, I was told I had to put it together, and I was very not happy about that for the cost, but down the road, it actually served me very well. And the second thing is, with that, my attorney kept bringing up, who was writing it, all these just like clauses and potential things that might happen, and I was like, it just doesn't really matter. And he's like, it doesn't matter until it does. And so really understand the contract and the language going in it, and spend some money on a good attorney because it will serve you well. Any other questions over there?
There's 1,000, yeah, and it's great. And my favorite part right now is I'll see a question pop up, and then you answer it right away, and I'm like, okay, that's, or at least adjacent enough where I think it's getting answered, so that's good. And knowing that we only have maybe like 7 or 8 minutes left for this part of the session, some of the questions are more sort of future-oriented. I mean, one of is what keeps you up at night, which I think we probably don't have enough time for, is my guess. But there's a couple of questions that are around sort of how you're thinking about exit, or if you're thinking about exit at this point. Did that factor in to the acquisition, or you're like, it's too early for that right now? Or like, how are you thinking about sort of a future orientation about your company?
I didn't take, and again, my goodness, this makes me sound really simple, but I wasn't really thinking about exit when I bought. That's not what this was about for me. I felt very confident that I could grow the business. I felt very confident I could make the business better. And there was a lot of opportunity in terms of systematizing and streamlining. And, everything was in spreadsheets. And so, we've made a tremendous amount of progress in that regard. I think about exit now, sure, and I'm not really sure what my plan is, but I think about it a lot in terms of, a few years from now, do I want to go sit on that beach and pay someone to be me, or do I want to, exit in a sale because, when you're the owner and you're the only owner and you don't have financial partners, you get all the reward, but you have all the risk. And the risk never goes away. Every day you own your own business is a day something could happen that you didn't see coming, and that could have a significant impact. So you do have to have, in my opinion, a reasonable risk tolerance. I have more ideas about what I want to do with the business to make it better than there is time to execute on. And frankly, right now, that's my biggest challenge. So each year I try to set, let's call it 3, and make sure that we're consistently making forward progress. And I don't, hearing the numbers that you're talking about, like in that PE world, doubling your income on an annual basis, like in the smaller businesses, that's not been my experience. Let me put it that way. And maybe it's because I'm doing something wrong, but I think, when you buy a small company to run it and make it better, you maybe don't see those, multiple or exponential growth numbers. For me, if I'm continuing to grow and I'm continuing to make the company better and I'm continuing to provide a good work environment and I'm continuing to support my family and all those things, and I'm offering benefits and healthcare and 401k matching, I feel good about that. And I'd like to keep that going as long as I can. But yeah, the risk and the exposure, it's a heavy weight. And so I think there will come a point where someone will come knocking on my door and I'll say, okay.
It's also a little lonely.
It is lonely. Yeah, it is. Yes, I'm not going to finish that thought.
Neil, you're going to bring us home with the questions. We got about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if you had to pick one or two, what things do keep you up at night?
Well, I was just looking at my notes here, and it kind of goes back to, I think you asked me a question about what can go wrong, right? I made these notes of my, just ideas, and there was one like, what can go right? And I have no bullet points under that, because we all know what that is, right? Like, everything's great, and you make a lot of money, and you grow, and somebody comes along and offers you a huge pile of money for your business, and so what can go right is easy to imagine. I think, employee attrition, yes, at the sale or the purchase, but just day to day, competing, making sure your wages are competitive and that you don't lose your best employees because somebody down the road will pay them an extra $1 an hour. That's the world I live in. I don't live in the world of like corporate salaries anymore and, annual bonuses. And that's okay. I like where I'm at, but it is a different set of risks. Large AR amounts going unpaid. I won't tell you who our worst payer is, but they're very big and they're very famous and they pay their bills very slowly. A downturn in business, right? Inflation, recession. A lot of our work is marketing related. And when there is uncertainty, marketing budgets get cut. Now, I, for what it's worth, am trying to double down on marketing because I want to come out of whatever this downturn is stronger. And so, that's my personal strategy for my business. But a lot of our clients, and we're mostly B2B, they cut their marketing spend. And so, that payroll comes up whether I like it or not and whether there's a downturn in business or not. I think, I guess it mostly comes down to making payroll and paying the rent and making sure your employees are happy. I talk to my employees. I've got 20 employees now, and I say, I want this to be a place where people want to come to work, where they don't dread going to work in the morning. They want to show up because they like the people that they work with and they like the work that they do. And I think I've created that. And not having that would keep me up at night because I now know, I now suspect, fortunately I don't know, how quickly things can unravel in a small business. And so I guess the other thought that I had coming into this is if you've never had your own business and you've always worked for another company, it is a new experience to realize how quickly things could turn. And so staying in front of that and making sure that it doesn't or that it can't, and having an emergency plan. Having an emergency plan.
So there's, I'll bring it home with one more. There's a couple questions in here specifically about industry specific, like printing or whatever. So maybe in the hour afterwards, whoever asked that, maybe they can connect with you about that. There's a couple of loan-oriented questions, but Rob is here. Rob, do you want to wave? Everybody, that's Rob over there. So Rob, I think, can answer those questions for you all, if that has to do with you. But there's a couple of questions that are about skills or the credibility gap that Sean mentioned. And so maybe the last question that we'll ask is, as you came in and you're like, the employees or the key stakeholders were like, this person knows nothing about printing, and you came in and, you know, Sean, you kind of mentioned like there's 120 list of the thing, and they're like, hang on, like just hold on for a second. What did you do, or how did you think about filling the credibility gap that you had, and how did maybe you leverage your skills? I'm combining a bunch. Leverage the skills that you had developed in order to fill that gap as quickly as you could, perhaps.
So I, again, taking a page from Sean, was very deferential and was just very honest and, you know, acknowledged the fact that I was not knowledgeable about the industry, but, you know, here's why I'm here, here's what I care about, and here's what I'm going to be focusing on. But that's why it's so important that all of you are here, because, you know, you are the real value of the company. And if I'm successful, then what I'm going to do is, you know, add systems and branding and marketing and social and ideally at some point AI, though I'm still trying to figure that out, how to leverage it best. And so I think what we developed was a mutual respect. I'm still one of the least knowledgeable people there about printing, although I can run a large format printer and a cutter if I need to. But we have a mutual respect, and I go to them with questions, and I think, you know, they feel appropriately valued for their knowledge.
Let's give Sara a big round of applause for dropping some knowledge. Hang out. You can hang out here. I just want to close with a couple things. First, some thank yous. All of this happens because of Ashley Mercer in the back, so let's give her a big round of applause. And second, I've had a few people come up to me and thank me for this event and the quality of the speakers. And I've been incredibly impressed with the quality of speakers. As we were thinking about this a few months ago, and we were starting to think about the speakers, and we met with the speakers, you're never quite sure how it's going to translate at the event. And I think our speakers have done a wonderful job of really providing a high level of entrepreneurship through acquisition. So if we could give them another round of applause, I'd appreciate it. Well done. And speakers, before you run out of here, please come up to the stage. We're going to take a quick picture. At the conclusion of this event, we still have this for an hour, and the reason we have it, if our speakers are going to hang out, and feel free to hang out, network, there's coffee. If you want to try the breakfast still, buyer beware. But please hang out. And then finally, this is just the beginning of what we're doing with entrepreneurship through acquisition, as I said early on. Our goal is to figure out how we can be a valuable resource here at the university. Adam over there, when I met him early on, and he runs the meetup here in Denver, talked about education as kind of a barbell right now. And I'll probably screw this up, but there's all this online stuff that you can pay for $3,000 courses and $5,000 courses. You're not really sure the value of it. And what's on the other side? I believe it's education. What did you have? Higher ed. But there's not a place that we have seen that can be a resource that is building community and has tools and curriculum and topics, and that's our goal. But we're only going to get to that goal by talking to our target customer and our stakeholders and figuring out what you all want. So today was the idea to set the table and show you what's possible and what's out there, but there's so many of these topics that need a much deeper dive. And we're happy to put those things together and figure out, what modalities and when's appropriate. But we need to hear from you from what's important. So it would be very helpful if you filled out that survey. We're not going to take your email address and sell it and spam it and do all of those things. That's just not what we do here. But we do want to make stuff that's of value. That's what we have on the garage, our entrepreneurship house. Make something people want. We live by that. In those booklets, there's a lot of helpful information on ETA. There's my contact information, there's Neil's contact information, and there's Kevin Bett's contact information. We didn't put our other speakers because we weren't sure whether or not they wanted to be contacted, but they'll be hanging out, and I'm sure you can find them on LinkedIn. But thank you all for spending time with us on a Friday and really helping to make this a very productive day. So everybody have a safe and a great weekend. And as I always tell my students, make good decisions.